Hello everyone, I am Alex and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I moved into this old rural house a few weeks ago. It sits alone at the end of a dirt road, with no neighbors close by. The property has a barn, a small field, and a dense patch of trees behind it. I've been trying to fix up the place. The roof needed patching and the windows were dirty when I got here. I brought only a few personal things. There's no television, just a small radio and a cell phone that barely gets a signal. Most nights I go to bed early and I don't get many visitors. Yesterday afternoon, I decided to explore the attic. I had never been up there before. I climbed the old wooden ladder and pushed open the hatch. I aimed my flashlight around, expecting some crates or maybe old clothes. Instead, I found a dusty wooden chair, 2 chipped ceramic vases, and a heavy cardboard box in the corner. Inside the box was an old rotary phone. It looked like something from the middle of the last century. The cord was long and tangled, the body was black, and the dial had chipped numbers. I picked it up. It felt solid, not broken. There was a phone line upstairs in the hallway, just an old jack on the wall, probably disconnected. I felt curious, so I carried the phone down and plugged it into that jack. I did not expect anything. I didn't think the line would still work. As soon as I plugged it in, I heard a faint humming noise from the earpiece. I picked up the receiver and listened. There was no dial tone, just a light buzz. I hung up and waited. Nothing happened. I shrugged and left it there on a small table in the hallway. I went outside to do some chores, fed the stray cat that sometimes comes by, and tried to adjust the fence near the field. That night I sat in my living room reading an old magazine. I kept glancing at my phone, hoping for a signal, but there was nothing. I turned on my radio and listened to some static until I found a weak station playing music. Around 9, I went to my bedroom. I got under the covers and turned out the lights. The house felt quiet. There was a slight breeze outside and the old trees creaked a bit. I must have fallen asleep for a few hours. I woke up to a strange noise. It was a kind of dull thud. Then I realized something else. I heard the old phone ringing, not the normal ringing sound. It was silent, but the phone's bell seemed to vibrate. I could hear a faint shaking in the hall. I got out of bed and walked toward it. The phone's rotary dial was turning slowly on its own, making a clicking noise. But there was no actual ring, just that weird clicking and a soft rattling hum. I picked up the receiver. At first I heard only a faint static. I said hello. There was a pause. Then I heard my own voice repeating the word hello in a dull, flat tone. It sounded like my voice, but empty, as if recorded through a tunnel. I froze, holding the phone. I asked, "Who is this?" My voice on the other end repeated me, "Who is this?" But it didn't sound like a question. It sounded like a statement. Then I heard more words I had never said. This voice described a place with no trees and a red horizon. It mentioned heavy stones arranged in rows and a sky without clouds. It named a town that I did not know. I listened, holding the receiver too tight. My hand felt sweaty and my heart beat faster. I tried to ask something else, but the voice kept talking, repeating random phrases I had never spoken. Then it repeated my name several times in a dull tone that made my stomach tighten. I hung up. I stood there in the dark hallway, listening to the house. The phone was silent again. I went back to bed, but I didn't fall asleep easily. My neck felt stiff, and my stomach felt uneasy. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about that voice. In the morning, I checked the phone. It sat there quietly. I picked up the receiver. The faint hum was still there. I tried the rotary dial. It moved, but when I tried to call my own cell, there was no connection. It didn't produce a normal tone, just noise. I decided to unplug it. I pulled the cord from the wall jack. I put the phone in the closet. That day, I worked outside for a while chopping some firewood. I tried to push the strange call out of my mind. I thought maybe it was some interference or maybe I imagined parts of it. By afternoon, I felt calmer. I ate a sandwich, looked through my belongings, and cleaned the kitchen floor. That night, I felt restless. The wind outside had picked up, and the windows rattled a bit. I checked the closet. The phone was still there, disconnected. I felt silly for being nervous. I got ready for bed, brushed my teeth, and closed the bedroom door. Around midnight, I heard a low buzzing sound coming from the hallway again. My stomach dropped. I opened my door and listened. It was coming from the closet. I opened the closet and saw the phone's cord lying limp on the floor. The phone itself was making a weak humming noise. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered. The rotary dial moved slightly as if pushed by an invisible finger. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't sleep. Finally, I gave in and plugged it back into the wall jack. Maybe if I answered it again, I would understand what was happening. I stood there waiting. At around 2 in the morning, the phone's receiver lifted on its own just slightly, then dropped back. I grabbed it quickly and listened. I said nothing this time. The line crackled, and I heard my own breathing echoed back at me. Then I heard my voice, but the words were all wrong. The voice described a large building made of old brick and corridors that led nowhere. It listed objects: a broken chair, a glass bottle, a rusted chain. I had not mentioned any of those things. I felt a cold sweat on my back. My throat felt dry. I tried asking who was on the line. The voice repeated my question in a flat tone. Then it started listing numbers and dates. I recognized none of them. I hung up. I pulled the cord from the wall again, throwing the phone onto the floor. I paced around my living room. My chest felt tight. I could feel a dull ache in my neck. I wanted to throw the phone outside, but it was raining hard. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I tried to calm down by focusing on simple tasks. I dried my face with a towel and took a few deep breaths. Then I stepped back into the hallway. The phone was on the floor. It was buzzing again. I could hear a faint click from the rotary dial. I put on a jacket and grabbed the phone. I carried it outside to the back porch. The rain hit my face. The porch light flickered slightly. I saw that the phone's cord was dangling. It was not connected to anything. Still, I heard the buzzing. I set the phone down on the wooden porch floor and stepped back. The buzzing continued steadily and low. I stared at it for a long time. Water dripped from the edge of the roof. My socks got damp. I waited, hoping something would happen. Nothing changed. After a while, I picked up the phone and went back inside. I felt uneasy leaving it outside. It felt wrong. I do not know why. I dried the phone with a towel and placed it on the hallway table again. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up every hour, expecting to hear the phone. By dawn, I felt exhausted. My head throbbed. I went outside to check around the house. There was an old telephone pole in the distance, but the wires were broken and lying flat against the ground. There should be no working line here. I checked the attic again to see if there were any strange cables. I found none. The attic was empty except for that chair and those vases. I ran my hand along the rafters. The wood was dry and splintered. Dust got in my nose, and I sneezed a few times. I saw no sign of hidden electronics or batteries. I went back down. I decided to try calling out on the phone again. Maybe I could reach an operator. I plugged it in, turned the rotary dial for 0, and waited. After a few seconds, I heard a click, and then static. I tried speaking. I said I needed to know what was happening. The line hissed. Then I heard my own voice again, but it sounded strained. It described a wide field with metal poles sticking out of the ground. It mentioned my kitchen door and the color of my jacket. I looked down at my jacket. It was green. I had never mentioned that color while holding the phone. I felt the muscles in my arm tense up. My stomach churned. I hung up again. Over the next few hours, I tried ignoring the phone. I made myself some coffee and ate some crackers. I washed the dishes. The phone stayed quiet. I kept glancing at it. It sat there, cord dangling, silent. I tried using my cell phone. No signal. I went outside and tried walking down the road a bit, holding my cell phone up, hoping for even a single bar. Nothing. The road was muddy from the rain. My boots got dirty. I walked back inside. The house felt stale and tense. As I passed the phone, it made a soft clicking sound, like the rotary dial turning a fraction. I grabbed the phone and shook it. It rattled inside. I tried removing the back panel, but the screws were old and rusted. I didn't have the right tool. I knocked it against the table a few times. The buzzing got louder. I stopped, worried I might make it worse. I tried wrapping the cord around it to keep it still, but that changed nothing. When evening came, I sat in the kitchen with the lights off. From across the room, I looked at the phone. My heart beat faster whenever I thought about answering it again. I tried to convince myself it was just some old interference from a weathered line, some looping signal that picked up my voice and fed it back. but that didn't explain the new words and details. I pressed my palms against my thighs, trying to steady my breathing. I listened to the house. The wind had died down. The rain had stopped. The fridge hummed softly. Around 10 at night, the phone started rattling again. It wasn't a ring, it was a weak vibration. I went over and picked it up. I put the receiver to my ear without saying anything. I heard footsteps on the other side. They sounded distant, like someone walking on gravel. Then I heard my voice describing a small room with one window and a bare mattress on the floor. I had never seen such a room. I clenched my jaw. My teeth hurt from the tension. I tried speaking calmly. I asked what the phone wanted. The line crackled. A voice repeated my question, then started listing objects again. A rope, a wooden ladder, an empty cardboard box. I looked around my house. I had a ladder outside and I had a few boxes in the attic. I felt sweat on my forehead. I wiped it with my sleeve. I asked again who was calling. The voice said my name slowly, dragging out each letter, then hung up. I heard a click, and the line went dead. I paced around the hallway, rubbing my arms. I tried to think of something to do. I decided to check outside again. Maybe I would find some sign of a line running into the house. I took a flashlight and walked around the exterior. I followed the side of the house and found a cracked metal box where a phone line might have been connected decades ago. Inside the box were frayed wires and spider webs. Nothing that should give a dial tone. I checked the back of the house. Nothing. I shone my flashlight at the telephone pole in the distance. The wires were still on the ground, tangled with weeds. I saw no sign of anyone around. The air felt heavy. My boots sank into soft mud. My breath sounded loud in the stillness. I went back inside. The phone lay quiet. I realized I was too worked up to sleep. I sat in the living room facing the hallway. I kept the phone in view, wanting to be ready if it moved. After about an hour, I heard a slight rasping sound. I got up and listened. The phone's dial spun one number and stopped, then repeated this action. I picked it up and placed the receiver to my ear. I heard heavy breathing, then my voice whispering nonsense phrases. The phrases had no meaning, they were just words spoken in my tone. I felt a pressure in my chest. I tried speaking normally. "I don't understand," I said. I wanted to stop. The voice didn't respond, it just breathed. I hung up. This time the phone's hum continued even with the receiver down. I tried unplugging the phone again. The hum went on. I threw the cord aside and carried the phone to the bathroom, turning on the light. I looked at it closely. The plastic body felt smooth. The dial moved stiffly. The earpiece smelled slightly of old dust, and the mouthpiece had a small chip in it. I set it on the sink and backed away. It kept humming. I turned off the bathroom light and closed the door. I stood in the hallway listening. The humming got louder. I opened the door. The phone was still on the sink. I picked it up, brought it back to the hallway, plugged it in again, and picked up the receiver. The voice started talking immediately. It said my name, then described the color of the floorboards under my feet. It said the word "stop" 3 times. I hung up and disconnected it again. Eventually, I brought the phone back to the attic and left it there. I did not know what else to do. I pushed the box that came with it over it, then came back down. Now I am sitting here waiting. The house is quiet. I can still feel that tension in my muscles, and my mouth is dry. I can hear my own breathing. I do not know if the phone will ring again. I am afraid to find out. I sit here in the dark, listening to the silence, waiting for any sound. I cannot relax. The phone might hum again or click or whisper. If it does, I will have to decide what to do. For now, I just wait. I stood in the hallway with my suitcase in hand and my jacket still on. I had just gotten back from a 3-day trip. It was late, and I was tired. I could still feel the lingering smell of the taxi I took from the airport, and my shoulders were stiff from the flights. I stepped into my living room and reached for the light switch. The lamp turned on, and I saw something on the carpet. There were wet footprints as if someone had walked across the floor with damp feet. They led from the front door area straight into the center of the living room and stopped against a solid wall. They looked like a person's footprints. I had locked my door before I left, and all my windows had been closed. No one had the key. I stood still for a moment. I did not smell anything unusual. The room felt quiet. I touched the carpet near the tracks. It was wet. I touched the wall where they ended. The wall felt cool and smooth. No holes, no cracks. I looked around for any sign of forced entry. Nothing. I checked the windows. All locked. The door was secure. I looked into the couch. Empty. I checked the hallway closet. Nothing there. I felt a slight pressure in my chest. It was late. I was exhausted and this made no sense. I took off my jacket, hung it by the door, and tried to relax. Maybe I had tracked in some water myself, but I had taken off my shoes outside because of the rain. My socks were dry. I grabbed the towel and dabbed at the footprints. They dried easily. I told myself to forget about it. I had been away and was stressed. I had an early meeting in the morning. I locked my bedroom door behind me before I went to bed. The next morning, the living room carpet was clean. I checked carefully before I left for work. No footprints. I left feeling a bit silly for worrying about it. Work was normal, and I came home at dusk. I ate a frozen dinner, watched some TV, and made sure all doors and windows were locked before showering. I tried to avoid looking at the spot on the carpet where I had found those footprints. Around midnight, I decided to head to bed. I turned off the TV and the living room lights. As I did, I noticed something on the carpet again. New footprints. This time, they came from the direction of the kitchen window and ended near the hallway that leads to my bedroom. They looked moist, like someone had stepped in a puddle outside and walked in. I moved closer. These footprints looked different. The shape of the toes seemed longer, as if the person had large, narrow feet. They were bare feet, but not shaped like mine. I checked the kitchen window. It was locked with no signs of entry. The sink was dry and the floor near the window was dry. Only the footprints on the carpet were wet. I followed them to where they ended. They stopped right at the edge of the hallway. The wall was normal. I turned on every light. I searched every room and closet. I looked behind the couch, under the bed, inside every cabinet. I listened carefully. Nothing. I could hear my own heartbeat. I tried the door handle to my bedroom. It was locked as I had left it. I opened it and stepped inside. The bedroom looked fine. No footprints on the wooden floor there. Everything was exactly as I had left it in the morning. I wiped the footprints with a dry cloth. It came off easily. The carpet was a bit damp, but I didn't see any stain. I stood in the hallway holding my breath, trying to hear something. I thought I heard a whisper, very soft, like air passing through a small gap. I pressed my ear against the wall where the footprints ended. I heard a faint rustle, like someone's breath. I said, "Who's there?" Nothing. I waited. Then I stepped back. I felt a chill. So I went to bed and locked the door again. The next morning I woke up feeling uneasy. I checked the hallway. It was dry. I went to work and tried to ignore what had happened. When I got home, it was still light outside. I searched every room first. Nothing unusual. I ate dinner and tried to watch TV again. Around 11 p.m., I shut off the lights and stood quietly in the dark living room. My eyes adjusted and I waited. After a few minutes, I smelled something like damp earth. I turned on the lamp. New footprints on the carpet again, this time starting near the front door and moving across the living room toward the window behind the TV. They were not the same size as last night's. Tonight they looked smaller and the toes were spread out like claws. I checked the door again. It was locked. The window behind the TV was closed and latched. I followed the footprints. They ended at the wall beneath the window. I squatted down and touched them, cold and wet. I leaned my head closer to the wall, listened. I heard a faint voice. It whispered something about a time I had lied to someone years ago. It mentioned details that no one else knew. I pulled back and fell on my backside. My heart was pounding. The voice was very quiet, as if someone was inside the wall talking softly. I stood up and ran my hand over the paint. It was solid. I pressed my ear to it again. I heard nothing. I wiped the footprints again and decided to stay awake all night. I turned on every light and sat in the kitchen, staring at the living room doorway. I made coffee. The house was silent. Around 3 a.m., I walked into the living room again. No new footprints had appeared. I went to bed at dawn. The next evening, I tried another approach. I placed sheets of paper on the floor, hoping they would catch the footprints or show some pattern. After midnight, when I returned to the living room, the papers were scattered, and there were footprints again. They were wet and shaped like a large foot with a high arch, leading from the window to the hallway bathroom door. They stopped right at the bathroom door frame. I checked the bathroom empty and dry, no water on the floor, no dripping faucets. I pressed my ear to the bathroom door. I heard breathing. It was slow and soft, right on the other side. I jerked the door open. The bathroom was empty. The whisper came from behind me this time. I spun around. The voice was near the wall behind the couch. It spoke in a low tone, mentioning an event from my childhood. It described something I had done that I never spoke about. My stomach tightened. My throat felt dry. I demanded that it show itself. Silence. I was shaking. I tried to clean the footprints again. They disappeared easily, leaving behind no smell or lasting marks. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Every night after midnight, I found wet footprints on my carpet. Sometimes they were large. Sometimes they were small. Sometimes they had the shape of a normal human foot. Other times they seemed twisted with long toes or uneven arches. They came from different parts of the house, often near a door or a window, and always ended abruptly at a wall or a closed door. Every time I followed them, I heard whispering. The voice never shouted. It never spoke more than a few sentences. It always revealed personal things about me. It mentioned past regrets, old arguments, private fears. It never threatened me. It never asked for anything. It just exposed parts of my life that no one else knew. I tried to catch it. I stayed awake, waiting in the dark. I set up a camera on a tripod in the hallway and let it record overnight. In the morning, the camera showed nothing. The footprints appeared in the footage after I turned off the lights, but there was no visible figure. One frame, the carpet was clean. The next frame had footprints. They just showed up out of nowhere. I tried calling a friend to come over. I didn't explain everything. I just said I had a strange leak and needed a second opinion. My friend came in the afternoon. We checked the walls and the pipes. Everything looked normal, no moisture in the walls, no mold, no leaks. My friend left before evening. That night, the footprints came back again, even clearer than before. Now they led to my bedroom door. I stood behind the door, my hand on the knob, listening. I heard the whisper again. It mentioned a lie I had told, a former boss, something I had never shared with anyone. I shouted at the voice, demanding it leave me alone. Silence. I tried calling a plumber the next day, pretending I heard water dripping inside the walls. The plumber found nothing. He knocked on the walls, checked behind the sink, inspected the attic. No water damage, no explanation. He left. That night, footprints again led to the living room sofa from the back window. They ended at the sofa's armrest. I pulled the sofa away from the wall looking for secret passages. Nothing. I heard the whisper from inside the wall again, describing a conversation I had on the phone once. A private matter. I felt anger rising in my chest. I wanted to find whoever was doing this. I tried banging on the wall with my fist, shouting, telling it to come out. My knuckles hurt from hitting the wall. No response. I decided to pull up the carpet in one corner. Maybe something was hidden underneath. I rolled it back, saw the concrete floor beneath, dry and clean. I put the carpet back. That night, footprints formed on top of the rolled back section as well. They just appeared on the bare concrete, wet, cold to the touch, vanishing after I wiped them. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it would stop if I stopped reacting. I watched TV with the volume high. The footprints appeared anyway. I tried sleeping in my car with the driveway gates locked. In the morning, I entered the house and found fresh footprints on the living room carpet. They always came back. I tried talking to the voice calmly. I asked what it wanted and who it was. No direct answer. It only whispered private details from my past. It never repeated the same secret twice. It always found something else to reveal. I felt violated. I considered moving out, but the house was mine. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That my carpet had wet footprints at night and a whispering voice inside the walls. I left a voice recorder running one night. The next day, I played it back. It captured my voice, some creaks, and a faint whisper. The whisper was too soft and muffled to make out words. It sounded like distant breathing. I tried sleeping in the living room with the lights on. Around 2 a.m., I saw the footprints appear before my eyes. I was staring at the floor. One moment, it was empty, and then as if someone had stepped down from thin air, a wet print formed. Then another, leading away from me to the wall. No figure, no movement in the air, just the prints appearing. I breathed through my mouth, trying not to panic. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing. I stood up and followed them. They ended at the wall near the corner of the room. I leaned in. The whisper was louder now. Said something about a piece of jewelry I had stolen a long time ago. I had never told anyone about that. The voice knew. I tried pushing against the wall, hoping it might open. It was solid. I dragged a chair over and slammed it against the spot. The chair legs chipped the paint, but no opening appeared. I called out that I would sell the house. I said I would burn the carpet. The whisper stopped. I ripped out a section of the carpet the next day and replaced it with new material. That night, footprints appeared on the new section. The same wet shape, this time a large flat foot with broad toes. They led to the hallway door. Behind the door, I heard my name being spoken quietly in a soft, calm voice. My own name. I yanked the door open. Empty hallway. I shut all the doors, turned on every light, and sat in the corner of the room with a flashlight. I kept my eyes open for hours, until they burned from dryness. The footprints came back every night after that, always ending at a wall, door, or window. I tried painting the walls. I spent a weekend repainting the living room and hallway. The next night, footprints reappeared. They ended at the newly painted wall. I pressed my ear to it. The voice mentioned a phone call I had made that morning. It described what I said and what I thought when I said it. It knew my thoughts. I considered leaving, but knew that if I left, I might never find out why this was happening. I tried sealing the windows with plastic and tape. I changed the locks on my doors. Still, the footprints appeared. Still, the voice whispered. My chest felt tight each time I heard it. Sometimes I broke into a sweat. Sometimes my throat felt scratchy and I swallowed hard. I kept checking my pulse, which was always fast at night. One night I tried to respond to the voice. I said, "I know you can hear me. Tell me what you want." The whisper paused, then stated another secret. This time it was about a fight I had gotten into 2 years ago. No demands, just facts about my life. Now I live with it. Every night I find footprints. I wipe them up. I listen to the voice and stand close to the walls, hearing my own past thrown back at me. I try to keep calm, keeping my lights on and trying to sleep for a few hours each night. I avoid talking about it with anyone. I do not mention these events. The voice keeps revealing secrets. The footprints keep appearing. I still have no explanation. The doors remain locked, the windows sealed, and the walls solid. Each morning, the carpet is dry and clean again. Each night, I wait for the wet footprints to show up and the whisper to fill my ears. I cannot stop it. I cannot reason with it. I can only stand there, staring at the floor, waiting for the next set of footprints to lead me to another corner, another door, or another whisper telling me something I never shared with anyone. That first night, I woke up to the sound of typing. Not a gentle noise, but crisp, fast, and steady. I lay in bed and listened to the clacking of keys. There was no one else in the apartment, and I knew I had left the lights off. I felt sweat on my neck. I heard a pause, a shift, then more typing. I stood up, walked toward the small desk where I had placed the old typewriter I bought that afternoon, and saw the keys moving on their own. No one touched them. I took slow steps, my pulse thumping in my ears. The paper rolled up and the carriage had words on it that I did not remember typing. I reached out, pulled the sheet closer, and stared at marks and letters I did not understand. I backed away. I felt my breath come out in quick, short bursts. I switched on the lamp and stood there until my legs hurt. The keys went still. I did not sleep that night. I will start from the beginning. I had failed as a writer. I had not sold any serious manuscript in years. My last 3 attempts at a novel had ended with me throwing piles of paper into a closet. I lived alone in a small apartment on a quiet street. I paid my bills by doing odd jobs online. I wrote product descriptions and blog posts for small companies. I had no steady income. I ate cheap meals. I slept on a worn mattress that sank in the middle. I had not felt proud of anything I wrote in a long time. On that particular day, I decided to walk around town because I had a headache. I wanted fresh air. I walked into a small antique store because I saw a window display with old radios and a grandfather clock that did not move. I went inside to look around. It smelled like dust and varnish. The shelves were full of lamps, plates, old cameras, watches, and random objects that looked heavy and useless. I noticed an old typewriter on a low table. Its black paint was chipped, and the keys were round and worn. A metal plate on the back had a brand name I didn't recognize. The carriage looked sturdy with a ribbon inside. The old man at the counter stood there watching me. He didn't smile, but just nodded when I asked if it worked. He said yes. It worked fine. I didn't test it, and I paid a small amount of cash and left with it in a brown paper bag. I brought it back to my apartment and placed it on my small desk. I felt curious. Maybe writing with an old typewriter would change something in my mind. Maybe I'd feel more honest with my words. I fed a blank page into it, and I typed a few words, just nonsense, to test the keys. They worked. The letters were clear, though faded. I turned off the light and made dinner, then watched TV on my laptop. I felt the weight of the typewriter in the room, as if it marked a new start. I went to bed around midnight. When I heard the typing, it must have been around 3 in the morning. I know the time because I saw the digital clock on my bedside table. At first I thought I imagined it, but the sound was too real. I got up, checked the locks on my door and windows. Everything was closed and the lights were off. My apartment was quiet except for that typing. It sounded exactly like someone pressing the keys with firm, even strokes. I walked over and saw the keys moving. The carriage moved to the right, one letter at a time. The sound was clear and direct. My arms felt tight. My forehead was damp. I pulled the page out. I looked at it under the lamp. The words were strange. I saw letters and accents that I did not recognize. They were arranged in short lines like sentences. I did not know what they meant. I did not understand the language. I tried to guess if it was Latin, Greek, or something else. I could not tell. I took a photo of the page with my phone. Then I took the ribbon out of the typewriter. I wanted to see if it would type without a ribbon. I waited. The keys stayed still. I listened for a long time. I heard nothing. I went back to bed and stayed awake until dawn, just staring at the ceiling. The next morning I woke up late. I decided to search online for the words I had seen. I typed them into a search engine, but no results came up. I tried different spellings. Nothing made sense. I stared at the typewriter now silent on the desk. I typed a normal sentence. This is a test. The machine worked fine. I tried to imagine a reason for what I had seen. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe I wrote something while sleepwalking. That idea bothered me. It felt stupid. But what else could I think? That night, I could not relax. I left the lights on in the living room. I kept the typewriter on the desk. I made a pot of coffee and sat in a chair watching it. Hours passed. I got tired. My eyes burned. I heard nothing. I was about to give up when the keys started moving again. I saw them press down one by one. The clicking noise was steady. I saw the carriage shift. I stood up and walked closer, but did not touch it. I watched letters appear on the page. They formed words, short groups of letters, with strange marks. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. I held my breath. The typing stopped after about a minute. I pulled out the page. I got another set of words I didn't know. The next day, I tried to find someone who could identify the language. I posted a photo in a forum. No one knew what it was. Some said it might not be a real language. I felt frustrated. I spent hours staring at the machine. By the third night, I was exhausted. I fell asleep around midnight. I woke up to typing sounds again. This time, it lasted longer. When I got up, I found more words, but now something else. I saw a sentence in English mixed in with the strange words. It described a narrow hallway with no windows. It mentioned long corridors and black shapes moving on the walls. I tried to understand what it meant. I had never written anything like that. I had never seen such a place. I felt my stomach tighten. Over the next few days, the typewriter produced more text every night. It always waited until I slept. I tried to stay awake, but I always gave in. Each morning I found lines of text, some in unknown languages, others in English. The English parts described places I had never visited. They mentioned old rooms with broken floors, piles of stones, flickering lights, and dark corners. They mentioned footsteps that echoed, heavy doors that would not open, and shapes that looked like people but never spoke. I felt a deep tension in my chest. I felt as if someone stood behind me every time I read the pages. I started to sweat more often. My hands shook. My mouth tasted bitter. One morning I found a line about a memory I had tried to forget. It was not something dramatic, but made me feel ashamed. Years ago I had tried to impress someone by lying about my work. I had claimed I was a published author when I wasn't. I embarrassed myself. I hated remembering this, yet the typewriter described it. It mentioned the date, the place, the room we were in, and the look on my face when I realized I'd been caught. My throat went dry. I looked around my apartment. I tried to find a camera or microphone. I tried to remember if I had told anyone about that memory. I hadn't. I had kept it to myself. I tried to hide the typewriter in my closet, but every night I heard it typing. I tried removing the ribbon again. In the morning, I found lines pressed hard into the paper. No ink, but the indentations were there. I tried unplugging my lamp and turning off all power sources, even though the typewriter needed no electricity. It didn't help. Each morning, new text appeared. The messages got longer. They started describing places that scared me. They wrote about endless hallways, flickering lights, doors that opened onto other doors, and whispering sounds just out of reach. I could feel my hands clench as I read. My pulse throbbed in my neck. I paced around my apartment and threw the papers into a drawer. I returned the typewriter to the antique store. The old man behind the counter just shook his head. He said, "You must be mistaken." He didn't remember selling me that machine. He said he didn't recognize it. I opened my phone and showed him a picture. He said, "I've never seen it. I felt a sharp pain in my temples." I pressed him to talk, but he told me to leave. I left the store feeling tense. My skin felt cold. That night I locked the typewriter in a trunk. I tied the trunk with rope and placed heavy books on top of it. I turned the lights on and tried to stay awake. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the keys again. I felt a tightness in my stomach. I wanted to run outside but stayed. I opened the trunk. The rope was still there. The locks were intact, but inside, the typewriter had new words on the page. This time, it mentioned me by name. It described my face, my hair, my nervous habits. It said I was standing there, reading its words. It said I was sweating, that my hands were shaking, that my eyes were red. It said I was scared. I dropped the page. My hands felt weak. In the morning, I tried to smash it. I took it to the bathroom and tried to hit it with a hammer. The metal frame bent a little. I cracked a key. My arms hurt from the effort. I left it there, dented, missing a few keys. That night, I stood in the bathroom doorway, watching it. At around 3 again, the keys began to move. Even the broken keys tried to press down, producing no letter. The carriage slid from side to side, printing nonsense characters. I turned the lights on full and shouted at it. I felt stupid shouting at a machine. I asked it what it wanted. It kept typing. It made a scraping noise. I pressed my hands against my ears and waited for it to stop. It finally did after a few minutes. I pulled the paper out, and it showed a single English sentence. "You cannot stop this." I wanted to vomit. I decided to get rid of it. I put it in a cardboard box and walked several blocks until I found a dumpster behind a closed store. I placed the box inside, covered it with other trash bags, and left. My legs felt shaky and my chest felt heavy. I tried to calm down by drinking water at a nearby convenience store. I walked home, locked my door, and double-checked the windows. I tried to sleep. I woke up after a few hours, and the sound of typing filled my apartment again. I jumped out of bed and ran to the desk. The typewriter was there, sitting on the desk where it always sat. I had no idea how it returned. The paper inside had short lines describing the alley and the dumpster. I had left it in. It described me walking away, looking over my shoulder, my panicked breathing, my sweaty clothes. It described my fear. I felt my arms tense up. I felt trapped. I decided to stop fighting it. I left it there and tried to ignore it. Each night, it typed something new. It described more unknown places. It described old memories I had tried to bury. It described strange halls. It described shadows with no faces. It described doors that never led outside. It described footsteps that followed but never caught up. It described a sense of no escape. I had trouble eating. My appetite was gone. I sipped water and ate crackers. I paced in my apartment, checking the time. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? I had no crime to report. I thought about selling the machine online, but who would buy it? And what if it followed me anyway? I tried leaving it out in the hallway of my building. The next morning, it was on my desk again. I tried taking it to a friend's apartment, but he wasn't home. I left it outside his door. I came back to my place. An hour later, it sat on my desk. It never made noise during the day, only at night. It never moved while I watched it closely in daylight. It waited. After several more nights, my eyes were bloodshot. I couldn't sleep well. I sweated all the time. My back ached from tension, and my throat felt dry. I started taking short naps in the afternoon because I couldn't trust the nights. The typewriter kept producing texts. Sometimes it was in languages I couldn't read. Sometimes it described places that sounded impossible. Sometimes it wrote about me, watching me, knowing my thoughts. It wrote lines telling me that I would never write anything worth reading. It wrote lines mocking my attempts at a career. It wrote about the times I sat in front of my computer, typing and deleting paragraphs. It wrote about the times I felt ashamed of who I had become. One night I ended up putting it on the floor. I sat in front of it and waited. Around 3 in the morning, the keys moved. I saw them pressing down as if guided by invisible fingers. The sound was calm and steady. I watched letters appear, describing my cramped apartment, my thin mattress, and the blank walls. I felt angry. I grabbed the machine and shook it. It was heavy. I felt my muscles strain. It did not stop. I pulled out the paper, and it kept typing on the empty plate and keys hitting the rubber roller. I heard the thuds. After that, I stopped trying to control it. I tried earplugs, sleeping during the day and going out at night to avoid hearing it. But whenever I returned, more pages waited for me. They piled up on the floor, my trash can filled with them. The machine kept typing about places I had never seen. Broken bricks, rough concrete, bare light bulbs, stale air and narrow passages. It described things I couldn't understand, but it never stopped. My attempts to escape didn't matter. My attempts to destroy it didn't matter. It continued. Eventually, I ended up with no other solution. I packed my few belongings and left the apartment. I took no furniture, just clothes and my phone. Before I left, I looked back at the typewriter one last time. It sat on my desk, silent, waiting for darkness. I left it behind. I didn't want to hear it again. I moved to a new place across the city. I locked my door and tried to sleep that night, telling myself it was over. I woke up at 3 in the morning. I heard nothing. I looked around my new place, saw empty walls, boxes on the floor, my own breathing loud in my ears. There was no typewriter. I tried to stay calm. My heart still raced. I waited for any noise. I heard only quiet street sounds outside. I never went back for that machine. I don't know what happened to it. If I ever hear typing at night, I sit up in bed and wait, listening. My back stiff, my hands clenched. So far I have heard nothing, but I don't sleep well. I doubt I ever will. I remember the day I found the mirror in the attic. I had been sorting through old boxes looking for some broken appliances I might fix or sell. The attic was stuffy and smelled like dust, cardboard and stale air. There were cobwebs along the ceiling beams. I felt sweat under my shirt. My throat was dry and my eyes stung a little. I was tired and wanted to finish quickly. But I noticed something against the far wall. It was covered by a dirty sheet and leaned at an angle. I walked over and pulled the sheet down. Underneath, there was a large mirror with a wooden frame. The glass was so dusty that I couldn't see my reflection. I remember the weight of dust on my fingertips when I ran them across the surface. I wiped the glass with the edge of my shirt, and the dust came off in thick smears. I stepped back to see my face but didn't see myself at all. Instead, I saw what looked like a long, narrow hallway with dark wooden floors. The walls were bare and gray. There were doors spaced evenly along both sides. At the end of the corridor, it was too dark to see anything else. I didn't know what I was looking at. I glanced behind me to check if something was reflecting in a strange way, but I saw nothing in the attic that could produce that image. I looked back at the mirror, and the corridor was still there. It felt wrong. It was perfectly still, with no sign of movement or light. I leaned closer. My breath made a small fog on the surface, but the image remained. I tried touching the glass. It felt cold, much colder than the stuffy attic air. I tapped it lightly with my knuckle. It sounded normal, just glass against wood backing. I stepped back again, looked around the attic, and then forced myself to look back at the mirror. The hallway was unchanged. I felt uneasy and swallowed hard. My heart beat a little faster. I ran my hand through my hair and wiped some sweat from my forehead. I decided to bring a candle. The attic's overhead light was weak and flickered sometimes. I found a small box of old candles in a cardboard box near an old lamp, lit one with a lighter. Holding the candle in front of the mirror, I expected to see the candle's reflection. Instead, the corridor in the mirror now looked slightly different. I saw faint shapes of furniture against the walls behind the doors, which were closed but looked old and worn. The candlelight also revealed something else, a figure at the far end, barely visible in the darkness. It wore a hooded coat or cloak. I couldn't see a face. It was just standing there, not moving. I felt a chill run down my arms. I gripped the candle tighter. I blew out the candle, and the figure disappeared. Now I only saw the original corridor without that person. I lit the candle again, and there it was, at the end of the hall, watching me. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps or breathing, just silence. My chest felt tight. I couldn't explain it. I felt like I should leave the attic, but I stayed, just staring at that strange scene. I went downstairs and brought 2 more candles. I wanted to see if something would change. I lit a second candle and placed it next to the first. In the mirror, the corridor shifted. Now I saw parts of my own house reflected, but they didn't look right. The hallway and the mirror had the shape of my upstairs corridor, but the paint was peeling on the walls and the floorboards looked warped. I saw a door that should lead to my bedroom, but in the mirror it looked swollen and cracked. I saw a small side table that I recognized as my grandmother's old piece of furniture. She gave it to me before she moved away. In real life, it was downstairs, not upstairs. But in the mirror's image, the table was in the corridor, angled strangely with something dark spilled on it. The liquid didn't look like any I knew. It was thick and black, and it reflected the candlelight in a dull way. The hooded figure was still there, standing now a bit closer, near one of the doors. I tried to see if it held anything in its hands, but couldn't tell. Its sleeves were long, and its face was hidden. I felt pressure in my chest again. My breathing was fast and shallow. I told myself to calm down. I told myself it was some kind of optical illusion. I stepped back and waited. The figure didn't move. I placed a third candle on the floor in front of the mirror. With 3 candles lit, the scene in the mirror changed again. Now I saw what looked like my own living room, but not as it truly was. The walls in the reflection were damp, with dark stains creeping downward. The furniture looked old and scratched. The windows had wooden boards nailed over them. There were items that belonged to me arranged in strange ways. My coffee table was tilted on its side. My couch cushions were piled in a corner. My TV screen was shattered. I recognized these objects, but they were all wrong. They were worn out and filthy in the mirror's version. I saw the hooded figure again, standing in the middle of that distorted living room. It slowly tilted its head as if curious. I backed away, holding my breath. My heart pounded in my chest. I ran my hand over my face, feeling sweat and heat on my skin. I couldn't understand what was going on. I tried turning off the candles one by one. Without any candlelight, the mirror showed only the dark corridor. With 1 candle, I saw the hooded figure at the end of that corridor. With 2 candles, I saw a distorted version of my upstairs hallway. With 3 candles, I saw a twisted copy of my living room. I wondered what would happen with 4 candles. I went downstairs and found another candle. My hands were trembling as I lit the 4th one. I placed it carefully on the floor in front of the mirror. The reflection now showed what looked like my kitchen. The counters were covered in dust and grime. The sink was filled with dark water. The refrigerator door was open, revealing empty, rusted shelves. Cabinet doors were either missing or hanging off their hinges. The hooded figure stood near the kitchen window, facing me. I noticed that its hood seemed damp and torn at the edges. I heard nothing. I smelled only the attic's old dust, but I imagined a damp odor coming from that scene. My stomach felt tight. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. I snuffed out the 4th candle. The scene went back to the living room. I snuffed out the 3rd candle, and the scene returned to the distorted upstairs hallway. I snuffed out the 2nd candle, and I saw the corridor with the hooded figure at the end. Finally, I blew out the last candle. The mirror showed the original corridor empty and silent. I decided to bring the mirror down from the attic and place it in my bedroom. I wanted to test this more carefully. I wanted to see if the location would change anything. I lifted the mirror and carried it downstairs, trying not to look at the glass. It was heavy and the wooden frame dug into my palms. I set it against the wall in my bedroom and closed the door. The bedroom was quiet outside, where I could hear faint traffic sounds. I sat on my bed, facing the mirror. In normal light, the mirror still showed that corridor. The doors were always the same. The floor was dark wood. The figure wasn't there. I waited, but it didn't appear. I lit 1 candle again. Instantly, I saw the figure at the end of that corridor. It stood perfectly still. I noticed now that the figure seemed taller than before, or maybe I was just seeing it more clearly. Its shoulders were broad, and its hood covered its head completely. I blew out the candle and waited for a moment. Then I paced the room, my feet making soft sounds on the floor. My breathing was steady now, but I was still uneasy. I felt like I was doing something I shouldn't do, like prying into something private. But I kept going. I lit 2 candles this time, and I saw my hallway again, twisted and dirty. I placed a hand on the wall beside me in real life, feeling the smooth paint. It felt normal. In the mirror, it looked cracked and peeling. I got closer to the mirror, trying to see if the doors in the reflection could be opened. I reached out and touched the glass. It was solid and cold. My fingertips left small smudges. I felt a sudden urge to try and communicate with the hooded figure. I knew it made no sense, but I said, "Hey, can you hear me?" I kept my voice low. I felt stupid talking to a reflection. There was no response. No movement. I tapped the mirror lightly again. Nothing changed. I wondered if I could place something in front of the mirror and see it appear inside that distorted space. I grabbed a small wooden stool from the corner of my bedroom and placed it right in front of the mirror. In the reflection, I saw only the distorted house settings that changed with each candle. I tried with 1 candle, then 2, then 3. The stool never appeared in the reflection. I tried placing a glass of water there. The reflection ignored it as well. The scene in the mirror seemed independent from my actions, affected only by the number of candles I lit. I wanted to see more. I lit 4 candles again. The kitchen scene returned. The hooded figure was there, standing by the sink this time. I got closer to the mirror. I noticed that the figure's cloak looked heavy, as if soaked in something. I didn't see any face, just darkness under the hood. I looked at the countertop in the reflection and saw a long, thin object lying there. It looked like a key made of dark metal. The key had a simple shape, no decoration, just a basic head and shaft. I stared at it for a moment. I wondered if it meant something. I tried to see if the figure was holding a key in any of the other scenes, but I never saw its hands clearly. I started to feel lightheaded. The tension was draining me. I decided to stop for the day. I blew out the candles and leaned the mirror face down against the wall. Without the reflection, I felt more at ease. I went to the bathroom and splashed some cold water on my face. My reflection in the bathroom mirror was normal. I sighed and went to bed. Next morning, I tried to ignore the mirror. I made coffee, checked my emails, and tried to read a newspaper, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that scene. I had to check again. I went back to the bedroom and lifted the mirror upright. The corridor was there. No figure, no movement. I lit 1 candle and saw the figure at the end. I noticed now that it was slightly closer than the first time I saw it, maybe a step or 2 closer. With 2 candles, the figure was at my distorted hallway's far door. With 3 candles, it was near my couch in the twisted living room. With 4 candles, it was by my sink in the dark kitchen. Each time I added a candle, it got closer, moving through these different rooms that looked like my home but ruined and abandoned. I decided to try 5 candles. I went back to the attic and found a 5th candle. I lit them all carefully, one by one, placing them in a line on the floor in front of the mirror. With 5 candles burning, the reflection changed again. Now I saw my basement, a place I rarely visit. It looked wet and smelled damp, even in my imagination. The walls were rough stone, and the floor had puddles. The hooded figure stood in the center. Its hood was tilted back slightly, but I still saw no face. It raised one hand, pointing at something. I followed the direction of that hand and saw a door in the back corner of the basement. I recognized that door. It led to a storage room where I keep old tools. But in the reflection, the door looked reinforced with metal bars. The figure was pointing right at it. My stomach tightened. I felt sweat forming on my neck. My heart thumped. I didn't like this. I blew out the 5th candle. The scene went back to the kitchen. I blew out the 4th, back to the living room. The figure remained in each scene, always closer than before, always watching. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I tried to steady my hand as I blew out each candle one at a time. With no candles, the corridor was empty again. No figure, no movement. I lifted the mirror and carried it back to the attic. My arm shook a bit. My back ached from the strain. I leaned the mirror against the same wall where I found it. I threw the sheet over it. I stood there for a moment in the dusty attic, breathing fast, feeling the sweat soak into my shirt. I listened. I heard only the muffled sounds of the house settling. I saw nothing unusual. I touched the sheet and pressed it firmly against the mirror's surface. It felt solid. I turned off the attic light and left. I went downstairs and sat on my couch in my normal living room. Everything was clean and ordinary here. I looked around at the furniture and the walls. Everything was in place. No stains, no cracks, no hooded figure. I felt calmer. I decided not to light any more candles in front of that mirror. I decided to leave it alone in the attic, covered and ignored. I didn't break it or throw it out, I just left it there. I kept thinking about it, but I never went back. I never lit another candle in front of it. I never saw that hooded figure again. And that's all I can say about it. I still remember the first time I saw that old elevator door in the basement. I had been working as the superintendent of this building for a few months, and I was still getting used to its endless storage rooms, cramped maintenance closets, and locked areas that nobody had touched for decades. One night after everyone had gone upstairs and the hallways were quiet, I walked down to the basement to check on a weird noise I had heard. It sounded like something heavy scraping against metal. I followed the sound through a narrow corridor behind a stack of paint cans and old ladders. I pushed aside some empty crates and found an old elevator door set into the wall. It was covered in a layer of dust and rust. I had never seen it before. It was an older style than the working elevators in the lobby. The metal frame was thick. The handle was a dull brass color, and the panel next to it looked like it hadn't been touched since before I was born. I tried to pry it open, but it was sealed shut. I noticed that there were no floor indicators or call buttons. There was only a panel with a few strange slots and switches that didn't look familiar. I wondered if it had been disconnected or if the cables were removed long ago. The building was from the 1930s, and I knew some old systems had been shut down over the years. I pushed and pulled a bit, but nothing moved. Eventually, I gave up and headed back upstairs. That night, I made a mental note to ask the building's owner about that elevator. I wanted to know why it was there and why no one had mentioned it. The next day, I checked the building blueprints in the maintenance office. They were old prints, yellowed from age. I saw that the elevator in the basement was listed as Freight Elevator B. It led to a shaft that was supposed to have been decommissioned decades ago. The documents stated that the cables and motor had been removed. The shaft itself should have been empty. There were no floor stops indicated on modern plans. It should have been a closed, empty shaft with no car. The paperwork said it was unsafe, and everything had been dismantled to avoid accidents. That evening, after my usual rounds, I went back to the basement. I had a flashlight and a small pry bar in case I needed to force anything open. I turned off the main lights to see if I could catch any sign of movement or hear that noise again. For a while, there was nothing. The basement was quiet. I listened to the distant hum of the building's boiler and the faint dripping of a leaky pipe. After a few minutes, I heard it again, a faint metal scraping sound. I followed it to the hidden corner and stood right in front of the old elevator door. It was closed. The sound grew louder, and I saw the door shudder as if something behind it was pushing. My heartbeat got heavier. My palms were damp. I reached out and touched the handle. It was cold. Without me pulling, the door suddenly slid open. Inside was a dark elevator car. There were no lights on inside, just darkness and the faint outline of the interior walls. It smelled like old metal and stale air. I aimed my flashlight inside. The interior looked bigger than I expected, and there was a control panel on the side with buttons that didn't look like normal floor buttons. They were marked with strange shapes, not numbers. I stepped in carefully, half expecting it to drop into an empty shaft. I had read that there were no cables, but the floor felt solid under my boots. As soon as I was inside, the door slid shut behind me. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I looked around. I noticed that the walls were dented in places, and the ceiling had exposed bolts and seams. The control panel was blinking with a small red light. I tried to open the door again, but it would not budge. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard a low humming sound. Then, before I could figure out what to do, I felt a sudden downward motion. I grabbed the railing on the side. The elevator was moving, but it felt strange. It wasn't a smooth ride. It vibrated and shook slightly. I stood there in the dark, breathing faster than normal as the elevator descended. After what felt like a long time, it stopped. The door opened on its own. I shone my flashlight into the space outside. There was a corridor with concrete walls and dim lights overhead. The corridor stretched out in both directions. I stepped out carefully and looked around. The air was stale, the corridor was silent. I walked a few steps, listening carefully, my heart still pounding. This corridor did not match anything I knew about the building. There were no signs, no markings, no doors that I recognized. I touched the walls. They were cold and rough. There were pipes running along the ceiling, and some of them dripped. After about a minute of exploring, I decided to go back to the elevator. When I turned around, it was still there, door open. I got back inside, and the door closed. This time, I pushed one of the odd buttons on the panel, a triangle shape. The elevator jerked and started moving again, this time going up. I had no idea where I was going. My stomach felt tight. I gripped the railing and waited. The elevator stopped again. The door slid open. I stepped out and found myself in a room with low-hanging pipes and a broken light fixture. The room was small and empty, except for a wooden crate in the corner and some metal shelves with old tools. Dust covered everything. I heard a faint buzzing sound, but I couldn't tell where it came from. There were no exits that I could see, just the elevator. I went back inside. The panel lights flickered. One of the symbols looked like a circle with a line through it. I pressed that one. The elevator started moving again. I began to sweat. I wiped my forehead and tried to stay calm. I thought about hitting the emergency stop, but there was no normal button like that. The panel only had those strange symbols. I waited. After a few more stops, I realized these places it was taking me did not belong in the building at all. They were silent spaces. Some were narrow corridors with no windows. Others were larger rooms with low ceilings and flickering lights. I saw moisture on walls, heard distant dripping, and smelled moldy air. I touched the walls and floors to see if they were real. They felt solid. At one stop, I found a hallway that stretched out so far I couldn't see the end. I walked down it for a couple of minutes, hearing only my own footsteps. When I turned back, the elevator was still there waiting. I lost track of time. Eventually, I pressed one more symbol on the panel, one that looked like a square. The elevator moved again, and this time when it stopped, the door opened onto a large space filled with a thin fog. The fog smelled like old concrete and dust. I coughed a bit. The room had metal beams crisscrossing overhead and a rough cement floor. I could see a faint glow from some lamps hanging far above, but no sounds except for a low hum from the elevator's direction. I walked a few steps and picked up a small rusted bolt from the ground. I put it in my pocket to prove to myself that this was really happening. I stepped back inside the elevator and pressed another symbol. The panel flickered. This time I noticed the symbols changed slightly after each trip. They did not stay the same. I could not read them, but I tried to remember the shapes. I wondered if the elevator was trying to show me something. I felt a knot in my stomach. I wanted to leave. I pressed the button next to the door, hoping it would return me to the basement. The elevator shook and descended. When it stopped, I felt relief when I saw the familiar basement corridor with my stacks of crates and the old paint cans. I stepped out quickly and looked around. Everything was where it was supposed to be. I turned back to the elevator, but the door closed and locked itself. I tried to pry it open, but it would not move. The next morning, I checked the shaft from outside. I took a flashlight and removed some panels in the maintenance room. I looked down the empty shaft. There was nothing there. No cables, no elevator car, just darkness and broken beams. I felt my heart pounding again. I had been inside that elevator, and it had taken me somewhere. I looked at the old documents again. They confirmed that the elevator should be out of service. I tried telling one of the other staff members about it, but I didn't mention the full story. I just said I found an old elevator door. He said he knew about it, but it had never worked as far as he knew. That night I went down again. The door was still shut tight. I waited in the dark for hours. Nothing happened. I returned every night for a week. On the 7th night, I heard the same scraping sound. The door opened again, revealing the dark interior. This time, I stepped inside and stayed near the door, keeping my flashlight aimed at the panel. I pressed the symbol I had first pressed. The elevator moved. I tried pressing several symbols at once. The elevator seemed to respond by taking me to different places. Some were small rooms, some long corridors. One place had a row of old lockers with no doors. Another had piles of broken bricks and a puddle of oily water. Each place was silent and empty. I never saw anyone else in those spaces. I never found any sign of life. It was always just me and whatever these strange floors or rooms were. I couldn't explain any of it. The atmosphere in those places made my hair stand on end. My stomach felt tight every time I stepped out. I constantly worried that the elevator might leave me behind. But every time I turned around, it was there with the door open. The elevator never trapped me outside. Eventually, I tried to bring a camera. I carried a small digital camera in my jacket pocket and took photos of what I saw. But when I checked the camera later, the images were just black or corrupted. I tried to mark the walls with chalk. The marks vanished when I returned. I took notes of the symbol sequences on paper. The next night, the panel showed different symbols. I started to wonder if the elevator recognized me. I had no proof of that. I didn't want to think about anything beyond the facts. All I knew was that I could enter it at night and it would take me somewhere underground or somewhere that felt disconnected from the building I knew. The places had no labels, no signs, no people. Everything was damp, old and silent. The air always felt heavier there. My feet felt sore after walking through those halls. I tried to bring a coworker down there one night. I asked him to wait in the corridor while I tried to open the elevator door. He stood there confused while I pushed and pulled at the handle. It stayed shut. There was no sound and no sign of movement. After a few minutes, he laughed nervously and told me to stop messing around. When he left, I stayed behind and waited. 2 hours later, I heard the scraping and the door opened for me alone. I realized that it only worked when I was alone. I decided to stop telling anyone about it. I kept going in, night after night, trying to understand the pattern. I pressed different combinations of symbols, wrote down what I saw, and tried to map the corridors by counting steps and turns. The layouts never stayed consistent. One night, a certain sequence of buttons led me to a corridor with a broken sign on the floor. The next night, the same sequence led me to a large empty hall with a concrete pillar in the middle. Each time I checked the camera, each time no usable photos. I tried recording audio with my phone, but the files just had static and some low humming noises. Nothing recognizable. My body reacted strongly each time I entered. My mouth went dry, my hands shook, and my chest felt tight. Even so, I kept going back. I wanted to find something concrete, maybe a clue or a piece of machinery I could remove and show to someone. But every time I took something, like a rusty bolt or a small metal clamp, it would vanish when I returned to my apartment. I checked my pockets carefully, but the items were gone. It was as if nothing I brought back stayed real. I began to think of the elevator simply as a strange feature of this old building. I had a job to do, and it was just one more bizarre thing I had discovered here. I could not fix it, nor could I explain it. The elevator did not harm me. It did not threaten me. It only showed me these strange floors and corridors. Sometimes I stayed for several minutes walking quietly, listening for any sounds. I never found anything living. I never felt a breeze or fresh air. Everything was always still. Over time, I learned the feeling of when the door would open. I could sense when the metal scraping would begin. It happened at random nights, never on a strict schedule. Sometimes weeks passed without any sign of it. Then one night, I would go down and there it would be again. The door open, waiting. When I stepped inside, I knew it would move. I didn't know where it would take me, I just knew it would be somewhere else, somewhere hidden. The panel would blink its symbols, and I would press them, hoping to discover something new. I never learned what the symbols meant. They never matched any letters or numbers I knew. They were simple shapes, but they changed position and order. I stopped trying to prove the elevator's existence to anyone else. I knew they wouldn't believe me. I just kept quiet and did my regular work during the day. I fixed leaks, replaced light bulbs, and checked the boiler. I dealt with tenants' complaints and tried to keep the old building running. At night, when I was alone, I sometimes ventured down to the basement and waited in the darkness. If I heard the scraping, I would enter the elevator again and take another trip. I never discovered the truth about it. I never found a final room or a final clue. But each time I stepped inside, I knew I would see something real. There was no guesswork. The floors and corridors were solid under my boots. The air smelled stale and old. The walls were covered in dust. The lights flickered. The elevator doors always closed behind me and then opened again somewhere else. I never got stuck inside for good. I never found a reason for the strange symbols, but I felt certain that it was not just a dream. It was there every time the door opened, and so I kept going. I remember the first time I noticed the door. It was about 2 weeks after I moved in. I was alone late at night, sitting on my old mattress on the floor. I had nothing but a mattress, a single table and a metal folding chair. No couch, no shelves, no TV. The place was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I got up, walked through the small hallway, and saw the door at the end of it. There should have only been a blank wall there. The floor plan was clear. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, 1 kitchen, and a small living area, no storage rooms or extra doors. But there it was, an old wooden door with chipped paint. Its handle was old brass. It looked sturdy. I tried it that first night. It was locked. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed I made some mistake reading the floor plan. Maybe it was a maintenance closet. The landlord hadn't said anything, but I hadn't asked. I went back to my mattress, lay down, and tried to sleep. That night, around 3 a.m., I woke up thirsty. The apartment was dark. I got a glass of water and stood in the kitchen. I heard a voice. It was muffled, not loud. It sounded like it was behind a wall or a thick door. I walked toward the hallway, and the voice was coming from behind that strange door. I could hear my name being said clearly, as if someone were standing on the other side. I got close and pressed my ear against the wood. The voice was male, soft and calm, but the words weren't polite. It mentioned that I left my dirty plate in the sink again. It said I always procrastinate at work. It said I never call my older sister back when she texts me. It started listing things I regretted not doing. Small things, like not cleaning the bathroom mirror or leaving a light bulb burnt out in the hallway fixture for days. I stood there with my ear against the door. My heart was pounding and my throat went dry. I said nothing. The voice didn't stop. It kept talking, mentioning details of my life that no one else should know. I backed away slowly. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I hadn't opened the door. I couldn't. I walked back to the mattress, laid down, and pulled the blanket over my head. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I examined the door again. The handle wouldn't turn. I couldn't push it open. There was no keyhole, just a handle that didn't move. I knocked on the wood. It sounded solid. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. No voice. It was broad daylight. Nothing was strange, except the door itself. I checked the apartment plans on my phone. I had a digital copy. According to that, there should be nothing there, just a solid wall. I walked outside into the hallway and checked the outer wall. The building's layout didn't allow for an extra room, which made no sense. That night, around 3 a.m., the voice came again. I was half asleep but heard it say my name. I opened my eyes. The apartment was dark. I felt sweat under my arms. I got up carefully and stepped into the hallway. The door was closed, just like before. I put my ear against it. The voice was there, muffled. It commented on how I wasted my weekend doing nothing. It reminded me of an old friend I never called back after I moved. It said I was a coward, always avoiding my problems. I whispered, "Who are you?" The voice stopped. For a few seconds, there was no sound. Then it said my name again, calmly, and told me I was talking too quietly. It said it couldn't hear me well. I asked again louder, "Who are you?" It did not answer directly. Instead, it laughed softly and said, "I would never open the door." I said, "The door won't open." The voice said I wasn't trying hard enough. I tried forcing the handle, yanking it, pulling it, pushing my shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. I felt panic. My heart was racing, my hands were shaking. I said, "Leave me alone." The voice laughed again. I stepped back, breathing fast. I turned on all the lights in my apartment, even though there were just a few ceiling bulbs. I sat on my folding chair in the living area and stared down the hallway. The door looked normal, just a closed door, but behind it was someone, or something. I couldn't deny that. Over the next few days, I ignored the situation. I tried acting like everything was fine. I went to work, said hello to my coworkers, typed up my reports, ate lunch alone, and came back home. In the evenings, I ate simple meals, microwave dinners. Since I had no TV, I spent time on my phone, trying to read news articles. Everything felt tense. I kept looking at the hallway. I avoided going near that door at night, even tried sleeping with earplugs. But every morning, I woke up feeling exhausted and nervous. After 3 more nights of hearing the voice, I decided to try something else. One afternoon, I called a locksmith. I told him I had a door that wouldn't open. I didn't mention anything else. He showed up around 4 p.m., a tall guy with rough hands. He tried the handle, frowned, and said it was strange. There was no visible lock. He asked if I had a key. I said no. He took out tools and tried to remove the handle entirely. The handle wouldn't come off. He used a small flashlight and examined the hinges. He asked if I was sure where this door led. I told him I thought it was a storage space. He said maybe it was sealed off on the other side. He got a small drill and tried to remove the hinges. The drill bit snapped, and he muttered a curse before trying again with a different bit. Nothing. It was as if the hinges were fused with the frame. He said he couldn't help me and that I should ask the landlord. I nodded and paid him for his time. As soon as he left, I stood in front of the door feeling frustrated. I tried kicking it at the lower part. My foot hurt, but the door didn't move at all. I pressed my ear against it. There was no sound. It was daytime. I called the landlord that evening. I asked him why there was a locked door that wasn't on the floor plan. He sounded confused. He said the apartment only had one bedroom door and one bathroom door, plus the front door. He asked if I was joking. I said no, I was serious. He said he would come by the next morning. The landlord arrived at about 10 a.m. the next day. He was a short man with a tired face. He followed me into the hallway and I pointed out the door. He looked surprised. He said he had never seen this before. He swore that wasn't there when he rented me the place. I said it's been there since I moved in. He tried the handle. Nothing. He knocked on the wood. Solid. He said he had no explanation. He said he would check old records and get back to me. He left with a puzzled look, but never got back to me. That night, the voice returned. Same time, 3 a.m. I was awake this time, lying on my mattress, staring at the ceiling. My stomach felt tight. My heart was beating fast, even before the voice started. When it did, I jumped up and walked straight to the door. I shouted, "Tell me who you are." The voice answered right away. It said it knew I tried to get a locksmith. It knew I talked to the landlord. It knew I kept ignoring my sister's messages. It said I was weak and scared. I shouted for it to shut up, but it didn't. I slapped my palm against the wood. I felt anger boiling in my chest. I tried using a crowbar that I had taken from my toolbox. I wedged it between the frame and the door, pushing hard. My arms strained as I grunted and pushed until my muscles burned. The wood didn't crack. The door didn't budge. I gave up and threw the crowbar on the floor. I stood there breathing hard, my back damp with sweat. I said, "Fine. You want me to open it?" "I will." The voice said I would never succeed. It said I was trapped with my own failures. I told it to shut up again. I walked away and went to the kitchen. I drank water straight from the tap. I turned on the stove light. I rubbed my forehead. The voice kept talking, muffled by the door, talking about my life. It named old projects I never completed. It named people I avoided. It listed small things I did wrong at work, like forgetting to reply to an email or leaving tasks half finished. I covered my ears, but I could still hear it. It was inside my head. I paced around, furious and scared. In the morning, I decided I would break through the wall next to the door. I went to the hardware store after work and bought a heavy sledgehammer. I carried it upstairs, my arms straining with the weight. I stood in front of the door at around 5 p.m. I didn't hear anything. I decided to break through the wall on the side. I swung the sledgehammer. The plaster cracked. I hit it again. More cracks appeared. I kept going until I made a hole. Behind the plaster and drywall, I found solid bricks, red bricks, stacked tightly. I chipped away at a few, but they wouldn't move easily. I ended up with a small hole that showed more brick behind it. Nothing else. No hidden space. Just bricks. I stopped, cleaned up the dust, felt stupid and tired. There was no reason for that door to be there. No reason for that voice. I was sure I wasn't crazy. I had heard it clearly. The locksmith heard nothing, though. The landlord acted like he had no idea what was going on. But I knew what I heard. That night, I sat in the hallway with my back against the wall opposite the door. I held the sledgehammer in my hands. I waited for the voice. It started right on time. I heard my name, and it commented on my posture, saying I was sitting on the floor like a defeated man. It listed my fears. I ignored the words. I said nothing, just gripped the hammer handle tightly. My palms were sweaty, my breathing loud, and I felt my jaw clench. I stood up and slammed the hammer into the door's surface. The sound echoed through the hallway. The wood didn't crack. I did it again and again. Eventually, I dropped the hammer. My arms ached, my back hurt, and I screamed, "What do you want from me?" The voice paused for a moment, then said, "I should open the door." I shouted that it was impossible. The door wouldn't open. A voice said I should try turning the handle clockwise. I tried that many times before, but I tried again. This time it turned. I heard a soft click. My heart rate jumped. I grabbed the handle with trembling fingers and pulled the door open. Behind it there was no room, no closet, nothing but a brick wall, just bricks from floor to ceiling. I reached out and touched them. They were cold and rough. I tried pushing them, but they wouldn't move. I shouted, "This makes no sense." The voice came from behind me, or rather, still behind the bricks. I turned around. No one was there. The voice said my name again. It said I was looking at what I deserved. I yelled for it to stop talking. I swung a hammer at the bricks, hitting them over and over. Dust filled the air. My arms burned. My eyes watered from the dust. After a few minutes, I had chipped away at some of the mortar, but the wall still blocked the space completely. I couldn't break through. I gave up, leaning against the doorway, panting. The voice kept going, quieter now, telling me I was wasting my energy, that I would never break through. I felt sick. I slammed the door shut. It clicked back into a locked position. I tried turning the handle again, but it was stuck again. I stood there in shock, leaning my forehead against the wood, breathing hard. The voice didn't stop. It started talking about my daily routine, how I wake up late, how I skip breakfast, how I leave my clothes piled on the chair. It reminded me of unfinished tasks at work, and it described my regrets in a slow, steady tone. I felt my chest tighten. My hands shook. I left the hallway and went to the kitchen. I needed a drink of water. The sink faucet squeaked as I turned it. I drank until my stomach felt heavy. Then I stood there staring at my reflection in the dark window. I tried to calm down. I thought about leaving the apartment for good, but this is the only place I can afford right now. I have no other option. That night I lay on the mattress, staring at the ceiling. I kept the lights on. The voice never stopped. It spoke softly, as if sitting right beside my bed. I could hear every word. I tried covering my ears with a pillow, but I could still hear it. It wasn't about the door anymore. It was about me, about my habits, about my fears. It went on for hours. My muscles felt tense, my neck hurt, and my head throbbed. I shifted positions on the mattress, kicking off the blanket. I got up and paced around, hoping the voice would stop if I moved, but it didn't. I approached the door once more, barefoot on the cold floor. I said, I opened the door and saw nothing. "What more do you want?" The voice answered, saying it wanted nothing. It said it was always going to be there. I asked it to leave me alone. The voice said it never would. I pressed my forehead against the door. It felt solid and cold. Then I knocked once. No response except the steady voice continuing its talk. It didn't raise its tone or laugh anymore. It just talked, pointing out small details of my life, reminding me of things I never fixed or changed. I felt a knot in my stomach. I tried turning the handle again, still locked. I asked, "Are you inside the wall?" No answer to that, just more talk about me. I rubbed my eyes, took a deep breath, and returned to my mattress. I sat on the edge, elbows on my knees, staring at the blank wall in front of me. I listened to the voice until morning. It never got tired or paused for long. It was like a constant presence, feeding on my frustration and confusion. By sunrise, I decided to just live with it. I had no solution. I couldn't break the door or open the wall. I couldn't explain it to anyone without sounding crazy. I got dressed for work, ignoring the voice. I washed my face in the bathroom sink, feeling the cold water on my skin. I dried off with a towel and stepped into my shoes. The voice kept talking in the background. I locked my front door, walked down the hall, and took the elevator. Outside, the world was normal. Cars passed by, people headed to work, shops opened. My apartment was the only place with that impossible door and that muffled voice. I went to work, trying to push it out of my mind, but I knew it would be there waiting for me that night, still behind that door, still talking, still calling my name. I knew I would come home, sit in that nearly empty apartment, and hear it again, and it would never stop. I got this old wall clock a few weeks ago from a relative who passed it on to me when they cleared out some family belongings. I never asked for it. I didn't even want it. It was large and heavy, with a wooden frame that looked dry and cracked. It had no hands. There was only a face with some faint markings and a sheet of glass over it. I thought it was useless. I hung it on the living room wall because I didn't know where else to put it. I didn't want to store it in my bedroom. It had an unsettling look, and it smelled a bit like dust and old varnish. I just left it there. During the day, I didn't care about it much. The first night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. I heard a loud sound. It was not a chime, not a ring, more like a heavy, resonant thud inside my ears. At first, I thought it came from the street. I got up, walked around my apartment, and didn't see anything unusual. My windows were closed. I checked the living room. The sound seemed to come from the wall where the clock was. I walked over to it and listened. It was silent now. I turned on a lamp and looked at it more closely. Nothing seemed off. It didn't have any visible mechanism. No hands, no pendulum, just the old face behind dusty glass. I went back to bed. The next night I woke up again at around the same time. The sound felt louder this time. It felt like a deep vibration moving through my skull. I got up feeling irritated and slightly uneasy. I went to the living room. The clock was still hanging there. As I approached it, I noticed something strange. There was a faint glow behind the glass. I leaned in, trying to see what was inside. I saw blurry shapes. They looked like furniture, but not like mine. I saw chairs that seemed suspended in midair, a table turned sideways, and a shelf that looked warped. I blinked a few times. The images were faint, but they were there. I backed away. My heart was pounding. My chest felt tight. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The glow faded. I only saw my own reflection. I stood there for a while, breathing fast, feeling confused and tense. I decided it was just my imagination. I went back to bed but struggled to sleep. The third night, I braced myself before going to bed. I didn't know what to expect. I closed my bedroom door and tried to focus on something else. But again, in the early hours, I woke up. The sound was intense. It felt like a heavy pressure behind my ears. I got up, turned on the lights in the hallway, and opened the door to the living room. As I approached the clock, I felt a chill on my arms. I heard a faint hum, like static. I looked at the clock's face. This time, I saw silhouettes of people. They were translucent, and they stood in a strange room I didn't recognize. They wore plain clothes. They stared at me. Their eyes did not blink. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak. I just managed to say, "What the hell?" They lifted their arms and pointed at me. Their mouths moved, but I heard no words. I backed away slowly. The back of my neck was damp with sweat. I felt my stomach clench. I turned around and went to the kitchen. I ran some water and washed my face. When I looked back into the living room, I saw only darkness in the outline of the clock on the wall. The next day, I tried to ignore it. I had work to do. I tried to focus on normal things, but I found myself glancing at the clock now and then. During the day, it looked ordinary. No strange images, no sounds, just an old clock without hands. I considered taking it off the wall and throwing it away, but it felt heavy and awkward. I didn't feel strong enough to carry it out by myself. Also, I hesitated for some reason. I felt like I needed to understand what was happening. That evening, I covered the clock with a thick blanket. I pressed it against the wall with a few nails and tape. It looked ridiculous, but I hoped it would block out any light or sound. I went to bed early, feeling uneasy. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up again. The sound was even clearer now. It felt like something pressing against the inside of my head. I got up, feeling irritated and scared. I stumbled into the living room. The blanket was still there, covering the clock. The sound did not come from outside. It came from inside my own skull. I felt a buzzing sensation behind my eyes. I pulled the blanket off. The clock's glass surface shone with a dull light. I saw the strange room again. This time I saw a couch floating near the ceiling. I saw small objects drifting around. I couldn't identify them. The translucent people appeared again. They made slow gestures, as if they were pushing against something invisible. I reached out and touched the glass. It felt cold. The people in the reflection turned their heads toward me again. They moved closer, their faces filling the glass surface. I stepped back and bumped into my coffee table. I felt my heart racing, my hands trembling. I could smell my own sweat. My mouth felt dry. I paced around the room, not knowing what to do. After a few minutes, the images faded. The light in the clock disappeared. I grabbed the blanket and tried to cover it again. My hands shook and I tore the tape. I cursed under my breath and finally managed to cover it. I went to the bathroom and sat on the floor, breathing heavily. The following day, I decided to move the clock. I took it off the wall. It was heavy. The wood felt rough in my hands. I dragged the chair over and slowly lowered it to the floor. I carried it down the hallway to a small storage room near my apartment's entry door. I leaned it against the wall facing away from me. I closed the door and went back to the living room. I tried to relax and watch TV. I forced myself to stay awake until I was very tired. I fell asleep on the couch. I woke up to the sound again. This time I heard it coming through the walls. I sat up on the couch, feeling stiff. The clock wasn't in the room, but I heard the noise anyway. I turned on the lights and walked to the storage room. I opened the door. The clock was exactly where I had left it. The surface of the glass faced the wall. I stood there, holding my breath. I waited to see if I heard anything else. I placed my ear against the storage room door. I heard a low hum. I stepped into the room and turned the clock around just to check. Its glass was dark. Nothing appeared inside. I felt frustrated and tired. I went back to the living room and tried to sleep again. Over the next few nights, the same thing happened. I tried moving the clock to different spots in my apartment. I put it in my kitchen pantry. I placed it behind my couch. I even tried putting it inside a large box with towels stuffed around it. No matter where I put it, I woke up in the early morning hours with that heavy vibrating sound in my head. When I checked the clock, I always saw those strange images. Sometimes I saw different furniture. Sometimes the people wore different clothes. They always stared at me. Sometimes they raised their hands as if trying to touch the glass. I never heard them speak. I never saw any doors or windows in that strange room behind the glass. It was always some enclosed space with objects floating, drifting, or rotating slowly. The people's faces looked pale and smooth. Their eyes were not bright. They had no expression except that fixed stare. I avoided looking at them for too long. Whenever I did, I felt dizzy and nauseous. I stopped inviting anyone over. I didn't know how to explain this. I tried calling a friend once just to see if someone else could hear the sound, but when he came, it was daytime. The clock looked normal. He said it was just an old piece of junk. I told him I was hearing weird noises at night. He suggested it could be old pipes in the building or some neighbor's appliance. I couldn't show him the images. They never appeared during the day. After he left, I felt alone and irritated. I thought about throwing the clock out, but my apartment was on the 3rd floor. I would have to carry it down the stairs and leave it on the sidewalk. I imagined myself doing that, but I kept hesitating. I was afraid of touching it for too long. My skin crawled whenever I handled it. The wood felt oily in some places and dusty in others. One night, I tried to stay awake and watch the clock carefully. I armed myself with a flashlight and a baseball bat. I sat on the couch and stared at the covered clock, which I had placed against the far wall. Around 2 in the morning, I felt a pressure in my ears. The sound began very low. I aimed the flashlight at the clock. I pulled the blanket down just a bit, exposing the glass. I saw a faint glow. The images formed slowly. I saw the floating furniture again. I saw 2 of those translucent people. They moved closer to the glass. I leaned in, holding my bat. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I held it anyway. I tried to see if there was any detail that made sense. The people pressed their faces close to the glass. I saw their mouths open and close, but I couldn't hear anything. The sound in my head got louder. I felt a ringing in my ears. I backed away, pointing the flashlight at them. My hand shook. The beam of light just reflected off the glass. It didn't seem to affect them. They raised their arms and pointed at me again. My throat tightened. I felt my hands get clammy. I shouted at them, "Stop!" I banged my bat against the floor. Nothing changed. The images kept moving. I ran out of the room and slammed my bedroom door. I heard the sound continue for a while. Then it faded. The next morning, I tried getting rid of the clock. I wrapped it in an old sheet and carried it down the stairs. It was heavy and my back hurt. I brought it to the trash area behind the building. I leaned it against the wall next to some old furniture. I returned to my apartment, feeling relieved. I spent the day trying not to think about it. I watched TV and did some cleaning. I even took a long shower. That night, I went to bed, hoping it was over. But I woke up to the same sound. My heart sank. I rushed to my front door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door and checked the hallway. Nothing. I turned on all the lights and walked through my apartment. The clock wasn't there, but I heard the sound in my head. I went down the stairs to the trash area behind the building. The clock was gone. I stood there for a few minutes, looking around with a flashlight. I didn't see it. The sound faded. I went back upstairs, feeling confused and frustrated. When I entered my apartment again, I saw the clock leaning against the living room wall. I froze. It was back. I had no idea how that was possible. I had locked my door. I closed my eyes and opened them again. It was still there. The sheet was gone. It looked exactly as before. I decided not to touch it. I just stayed in my bedroom for the rest of the night, trying to block the sound with pillows over my ears. In the early morning, I peeked into the living room. The clock looked normal, silent, just an old piece of wood and glass. But I knew I couldn't get rid of it. I knew it would keep coming back. I spent the next few days leaving it alone. Every night I woke up with that sound. Every night I saw those images. I felt my stomach churn each time. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My muscles ached. I tried covering my ears. I tried turning on all the lights. I tried playing loud music. None of it helped. I realized I was stuck with this thing. I could see the translucent people pointing at me, their pale faces close to the glass. I could see chairs and tables floating behind them. I could feel my head pounding and my mouth tasting bitter from stress. I could only stand there night after night watching them stare at me. I couldn't understand what they wanted. I tried once hitting the glass with a hammer, but it didn't crack. The sound only got louder and the images got brighter. I gave up. Now I just stand there tense, until they fade away. By morning, I try to pretend I'm fine, but I know I'm not. I know that every night I will wake up again. I know I will see them again. I know I cannot escape this clock. It's always here, showing me those strange rooms and those silent people who stare and point. There is nothing else I can do. I remember the night I first saw the painting. It was 2 weeks ago, after closing hours at the small museum where I worked as a curator. I had just finished locking up the main gallery and was sitting alone in my office on the second floor. That's when a delivery guy left a large wrapped frame at the front desk. He didn't say who sent it, he just said it was for me. I signed for it, brought it upstairs, and pulled off the brown paper. I saw a portrait of a man wearing a simple black coat and looking straight ahead with a blank expression. His eyes were completely white. No pupils, no iris, just white. I tried to find a signature, but there wasn't one. The style looked old, but I couldn't place it. The canvas felt dry and smelled like old varnish. I decided to put it on my office wall for the night and figure out what to do with it in the morning. I hung it on a nail above my desk. It was a bit crooked at first, so I straightened it. The man's face still looked lifeless. I stared at him for a bit. The white eyes seemed off-putting, but I'd seen odd paintings before, so I didn't think too much of it. The rest of the night was calm. I read some documents, replied to a few emails, and made a list of objects for the next exhibit. I went home late, around midnight, locked the office door, and left the painting there. I slept fine that night. The next day, I examined the painting under better light. I brought in a magnifying glass to look for brush strokes, anything that could identify the style. I noticed that the skin tone of the painted figure was slightly uneven, like it had been touched up over time. The coat looked plain. The background was dark and empty. Nothing stood out except the eyes. I leaned close to the canvas. The eyes weren't painted in a typical way. They had no lines or shading, just a flat, uniform whiteness. I tried to see if maybe they had faded, if once there had been pupils that time had erased, but I couldn't tell. I stepped back and sat at my desk. I decided to keep it aside until I could show it to a specialist or find a record of it in the museum archives. I went on with my day, dealt with other issues, met some visitors, supervised a cleaning crew, and had a late lunch in the tiny break room upstairs. That evening, after everyone left, I stayed late again. The museum had been quiet. I wanted to finish some paperwork. I had the painting right behind me. Around 9 p.m., I turned off the main ceiling light and used only my desk lamp. The painting sat in the dimness. I could see its frame and that face behind me if I glanced over my shoulder. At one point, while reviewing a thick stack of old letters, I thought I heard a soft creak. I figured it was the old wood floor settling. This building is old, so it's not unusual. A few minutes later, I felt an odd sensation. The hairs on my neck stood up. I turned to look at the painting. It seemed slightly tilted to the left, as if it had moved. I knew I had hung it straight. I stood up, walked over and adjusted it. The frame felt solid. The nail was stable. I sat back down and tried to ignore it. I worked for another hour without interruptions. Around 10:30 p.m., I stretched and rubbed my eyes. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the painting again. This time I noticed something strange. The figure's head looked turned a bit more toward me, as if the shoulders had shifted. I stood up again and stared at it closely. The head angle looked different from when I first hung it. Figure's chin seemed a bit higher, and the angle of the left shoulder seemed off. I ran my hand along the frame, checked if something behind the canvas caused any swelling. Nothing. I felt a chill in my stomach. It didn't make sense. I turned on the overhead light to see better. The painting appeared normal. The man's face looked the same as before, blank white eyes, simple features. I turned the lights back off to see if it changed under dim light. Nothing. It looked fine. I decided I was just tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. When I came back, the painting looked exactly the same. I sat down, tried to focus on my work, and eventually went home. The next day, I asked my assistant if she knew anything about the painting. She had no idea. I asked the front desk staff if they recognized the delivery guy. No one had a clue. The museum receives gifts sometimes, but usually with a letter or some reference. This one came out of nowhere. I spent most of the day going through the archives. Nothing matched the description. I searched online with generic terms. Too many random results came up. I set it aside for later. That night I stayed again, determined to finish a report. The painting still hung behind my desk. I tried not to think about it. Around 11 p.m., I got the feeling that something in the room wasn't right. I turned around and saw that the painting looked slightly closer to the right edge of the wall than before. I knew I hadn't moved it. I approached it slowly. My heartbeat felt heavier. I touched the frame. It didn't budge easily. The nail was firmly in place. I pulled slightly. It resisted. I stepped back and frowned. The painting shouldn't move on its own. There was no draft. The windows were closed. The museum's climate control is stable. I turned on the light again. I noticed something else. The eyes seemed to follow me. When I moved to the left side of the room, the white eyes seemed angled that way. When I moved to the right, they shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. I felt sweat on my forehead. My hands were cold. I took a deep breath and told myself I was imagining things. I got closer, put my face right up to the glass frame. The brush marks were visible. The eyes were just paint. They had no depth. I stepped back, turned around, and walked toward the door. Something made me look at the reflection in the glass. I could see my reflection. Behind me, I saw a vague outline of another figure. It stood close to my shoulder. I spun around, but nothing was there. My chest felt tight. I looked back at the glass. My reflection was normal now. No one else appeared behind me. I decided I had worked enough and left. I locked the office and went home. I tried to sleep, but I kept seeing those white eyes in my mind. The next morning, I opened the office. The painting was still there in the correct spot, facing forward. Sunlight came through the window. Nothing unusual. I told myself that maybe I had imagined the figure in the reflection. Maybe I was overworked. I spent the day handling normal museum tasks, focusing on other things. That evening, though, I found myself alone again in the office. I didn't have to stay late, but I wanted to figure out what was going on. I brought a small measuring tape and a pencil. I measured the painting's exact distance from the corner of the room and marked the position lightly on the wall with the pencil. I turned off all the lights, except for the lamp on my desk. I sat down and watched the painting. After about an hour, I looked up and saw that it appeared to be about half an inch off from my pencil mark. I stood up and checked the measurement. It was definitely different. I felt my heart pounding. This was not in my head. Something was moving it. I grabbed the frame and tried to shift it, but it wouldn't move easily. To get it off alignment, I had to apply some force. The nail was solid. It made no sense. I stepped back and looked at the painting. The man's white eyes stared forward. I turned on my phone camera and recorded a short video, just a few seconds of the painting. Nothing moved on video. The painting looked normal. I turned off the camera and stood still, watching. After a minute, I noticed that the figure's left eyebrow seemed slightly lifted, like it had changed expression. My stomach twisted. I leaned in and stared at it. The painted face looked a bit more like mine now. as if the nose shape had changed. I knew that the night before the nose had been straighter. Now it had a slight curve like my own nose. I reached for the desk lamp and aimed it directly at the painting. I tried to see if the texture was shifting. It looked completely still. I touched the glass, felt it cool under my fingers. I knocked on the frame. Solid wood. Behind me, the silence felt heavier. The air felt thick. I turned around fast and checked the reflection in the glass again. This time I saw that strange figure next to me again. Closer now, a person-shaped blur standing at my shoulder height, head slightly tilted. I whipped around to face the room. Nothing. I looked back at the reflection and saw only my own face, pale and sweating. I decided I had to remove the painting. I took it off the nail and placed it facing the wall. I set it on the floor, frame against the plaster, so it couldn't watch me. I sat down at my desk and tried to calm down. After a few minutes, I heard a scraping sound. I looked up. The painting had shifted on the floor. It tilted slightly away from the wall, as if pulled from behind. I jumped up, grabbed the painting, and set it flat on the floor, facing upwards. I put a stack of heavy books on top of it. I thought that would keep it from moving. We stood over it, breathing fast. My arms tense. I watched for several minutes. The stack of books remained still. I began to feel a bit calmer. Then I saw it. The top book slid a fraction of an inch to the side. I froze. I kneeled down and tried to hold the frame with my hands. I pressed down firmly. I felt nothing unusual, no vibrations, no movement. When I let go, everything stayed still. I sat back in my chair, not knowing what to do. I decided to leave the office. I turned on all the lights, locked the door, and went downstairs. I sat in the break room, drank some water, and tried to think. I had to deal with it somehow. I couldn't tell my coworkers I was scared of a painting. They would laugh or think I was losing my mind. But I couldn't deny what I saw. The painting moved. The image changed. Its eyes followed me. It resembled me more now. The eyebrows, the nose, even the shape of the chin looked more like mine. After an hour, I returned to the office. I opened the door slowly. The painting was no longer under the books. It was back on the wall, hanging neatly as before. My pencil mark was visible on the wall. The painting was now aligned with that mark again. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I approached the painting. The face looked even more familiar now. The hairstyle resembled mine, the jawline, the ears. The eyes were still white, but I could see faint outlines that suggested my own eye shape. I felt my stomach clench. My hands were shaking. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. I said something soft, just a whisper. Who or what is it? No answer. I moved to the side and looked at the reflection in the glass. The figure behind me was there again, now in sharper focus. It stood just a few inches from me. I could see its shape more clearly. It had a body like a person tall, wearing something dark, but I couldn't see its face well. My neck felt stiff. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone right there. Nothing. I decided to take the painting down and store it in the basement. I grabbed it off the wall and headed toward the hallway. As soon as I stepped out of the office, I felt the weight in my arms shift strangely. The painting pressed down harder, as if it had grown heavier. I almost dropped it. I strained my arms and carried it downstairs. The basement was quiet, lit by a single overhead bulb. I placed the painting against a metal shelf and backed away. I stood there for a minute, watching it. No movement. I felt relieved. I locked the basement door and went home. The next morning, I went straight to the basement to check on it. I turned on the light and saw the painting on the floor, facing upward. It must have fallen or moved. The frame wasn't damaged. I picked it up. The figure in the painting looked exactly like me now, except the eyes were still white. My own hairline, my own facial structure. My heart thumped. I could barely breathe. I set it back against the shelf and stepped away. The painted figure's mouth looked slightly open, as if it was about to speak. I couldn't handle it. I took a cloth and threw it over the painting. The cloth draped over the frame, blocking its gaze. I felt safer that way. I spent the day trying to work as normal, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about that face. I visited the basement a few hours later. The cloth was on the floor, several feet away from the painting. It stood upright against the shelf, facing me, uncovered. I backed up slowly, feeling my hands shake. My heart raced. I whispered to myself that this was impossible and decided to turn off the light and leave it there. I locked the door, thinking maybe if I ignored it, it would stop. But after closing hours, I had to walk by the basement door to leave. As I passed it, I heard a faint scraping noise behind it. I pressed my ear to the door and heard a soft sound like a frame shifting against the floor. I backed away and hurried out of the building. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I checked again. The painting was now leaning near the door, as if waiting for me. The face was unmistakably mine. The eyes were still white, but I could see a faint reflection of light in them, like real eyes. I grabbed the painting and took it back upstairs. I didn't want it chasing me around the building. I placed it on my office wall again and locked myself inside with it, waiting. I watched it for hours, barely blinking. It didn't move while I stared directly at it, but if I looked away, even for a second, when I looked back, it seemed slightly different. A shift in the frame, a movement of the chin. At midnight, I turned on all the lights and stood in front of the painting, checking my reflection again. The figure behind me was closer than ever, practically touching my shoulder. I turned around and for a brief second I felt a cold pressure near my back. Then it was gone. I looked back at the painting. It was me in that frame. My face, my hair, but those white eyes. I clenched my jaw. My spine tingled. I pressed my hand against my chest to steady my breathing. I reached up and tried to pry the painting off the frame to remove the canvas. It wouldn't budge. The nails were old and solid. I gave up and just stared at it, unsure what to do. I'm writing this now in my office with the painting behind me. I don't know who delivered it. I don't know why it moves or changes. I only know that every time I let my guard down, it shifts. I see that figure in the reflection just behind me. I feel it in the room, even though I can't see it when I turn around. I see my own face in that painting, as if it's becoming a mirror. My hands are shaking as I type this. I don't know how long I can stand this, but I can't bring myself to destroy the painting. I just sit here waiting for the next time it shifts, and wondering if someday I'll turn around and find someone standing right there, looking exactly like me with white eyes and no explanation. That night I noticed a thin mist coming out of the ceiling corners in my apartment. I was sitting in my living room, holding a remote control, trying to find something decent on TV. I glanced up and saw a faint grayish smoke drifting down near the top of the walls. It smelled strange, like something sweet with a sour edge. I stood up and stepped closer to where the mist seemed thickest. I had been alone in that apartment for over a year. It was a one-bedroom place in a quiet building with thin walls. I could usually hear my neighbors or traffic outside, but right then I didn't focus on those sounds. The mist took my attention. I tried waving my hand through it. It didn't feel wet. It was just a slight haze that seemed to move on its own. I turned on the lights to full brightness, hoping I could see it better. It didn't really help. The mist drifted around as if it had its own quiet currents. The first night, I just ignored it and opened a window to try to let it out. The air outside was cold. I noticed the mist thinning near the window, but it was still there in the corners. It didn't set off the smoke detector, and I didn't smell any sign of an electrical problem. I closed the window when I got too cold and tried to sleep. I remember lying in bed, thinking about whether I had some kind of leak from the apartment upstairs. But there were no water stains, just this light haze. The next day, I noticed small changes in my apartment. When I got home from work, my coffee mug, which I had left on the kitchen counter that morning, was now on the table by the couch. I was sure I hadn't left it there. I checked my door. It was still locked. My spare key was still in my desk drawer. I figured maybe I was tired or distracted. I went into the bathroom and saw that the mirror looked like it had faint smudges on it. I wiped them with a rag, but they didn't come off easily. I leaned in close and saw that these weren't just random smudges. They looked like handprints. They were small, but shaped like normal hands. I touched the glass. It felt normal. I thought about calling the landlord, but I decided to wait. I didn't want to sound like some paranoid tenant. I just shook my head, grabbed a paper towel, and tried scrubbing again. Eventually, I got most of the smudges off. That evening, the mist was back. I sat on my couch and watched it drift along the top edges of the room. My TV was on mute. I stared at the mist. It was hard to see if it had any shape, but at one point it seemed to form a sort of outline, like a head and shoulders. But it wasn't stable. It shifted and broke apart after a few seconds. The smell was stronger that night. I could taste it in my mouth, making me swallow more often. I tried talking out loud. "Who's there?" I felt stupid saying it, but I did it anyway. I listened and waited. I only heard a soft wheezing sound, maybe just my own breathing. I stood up and walked around, checking each corner, seeing if there was some gap in the walls. I didn't find anything. I remember sitting back down and feeling uneasy. My pulse was faster than normal and my palms were damp. I ran my hands over the fabric of the couch to dry them. I tried not to think about it too much. I turned the TV sound back on and watched some random show until I got tired and went to bed. In the morning, I noticed that the shoes I had left by the door were now facing the wrong way. Instead of facing out, they faced in. I hadn't done that. I checked my bathroom mirror again. More faint prints were there, scattered around like someone had pressed their hands against the glass while it was steamed up. I had taken a shower the night before, and I remembered the mirror being foggy, but I never touched it with my hands. I always used a towel. I tried to think logically. Maybe the moisture had settled in strange patterns. I tried to clean the mirror again. The smudges faded, but never fully disappeared. I decided to ignore it and get ready for work. Later that night, around 10 or 11, the doorbell rang. I was sitting in my living room again, trying to read emails on my phone. The sound made me jump. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I opened the door and checked the hallway. It was empty and silent. I closed the door and locked it again. 10 minutes later, it rang again. I rushed to the door this time, hoping to catch whoever was messing with me. I yanked it open. The hallway was still empty. I walked a few steps out and looked around. Nothing. I listened carefully, just the hum of the building's lights. I went back inside and closed the door, making sure to secure the chain lock. I stood there for a while, looking at the door, waiting to see if I'd hear the chime again. My heart beat too fast. My legs felt weak. I took a deep breath and shook my head. After a few minutes, I walked back to the couch and sat down. I tried talking to the mist again. I said, "What do you want?" I waited, straining my ears. For a few seconds, I heard nothing except my own breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then I heard something that sounded like a muffled laugh. It was quiet and short, like someone holding back a chuckle. I stood up. My head felt light. I said, "Hey, who are you?" I got no response. The mist was there, shifting along the ceiling line. My eyes watered a bit, because the smell got stronger. I coughed and waved my hand in front of my face. I tried to open the window again, letting in some fresh air. The outside traffic was making distant noise. I hoped the fresh air would clear my head. Over the next few days, the activity got worse. I found random items moved around when I got home. A fork that I left in the sink turned up in my bedroom. My TV remote ended up in the bathroom sink. I started leaving everything in very specific spots, so I would know if something had changed. Each day, I found more evidence that something was messing with me. I stopped sleeping well. I would lie awake listening for the doorbell or the sound of something being moved. I thought about calling the police, but what could I tell them? That there was a strange mist in my apartment and items were moving on their own. They would think I was insane. I tried calling a friend once just to chat and maybe get my mind off it. While I was on the phone, I saw a kitchen cabinet door slowly open by itself. It made no sound at first. I stood there, phone in hand, watching it swing open. I told my friend I had to go and hung up. I tried pushing the mist away with a fan. I set up a small fan on top of a stool and aimed it at the corner of the living room. The mist spread out and thinned, but it always found its way back. I spent hours just sitting and watching it. I tried not to panic. Sometimes my stomach felt sick, and I lost my appetite. I ate less. My chest felt tight, and I was always on edge. I started checking the locks on my door and windows every hour. Nothing seemed forced or broken. One evening, I decided to talk directly to whatever was causing this. I stood in the middle of my living room and spoke clearly. I said, "I know you're here. I want you to leave." I listened. I heard a quiet giggle, like the kind I heard before. I kept speaking, "I'm not leaving, so you can stop this." I waited. The mist swirled in the corner. I heard the muffled laugh again, followed by what sounded like soft breathing. I swallowed hard. The apartment felt colder. I walked to the bathroom and looked at the mirror again. More handprints spread across the glass, pressed tightly as if someone had climbed over the sink to place them there. I touched the mirror's surface. It felt cool. I turned on the hot water to see if the steam would change the prints, but they stayed. I tried sleeping in the living room, dragging the blanket out and laying down on the couch. I kept the lights on. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of the doorbell again. I sat up quickly and stared at the door. I didn't move. The doorbell rang once more, but I didn't go to the door this time. I just watched it. It stayed closed with the chain lock hung loose. After a minute, I got up and walked slowly to the door, listening for any sound outside. Nothing. I felt sweat on my forehead and my legs trembled. I turned around and saw the mist forming a shape again near the corner of the ceiling. It looked like a tall figure, but with no distinct features. I blinked and it dispersed, leaving just a haze drifting in small currents. I whispered, "What are you?" I heard breathing. It sounded close to my ear, but I saw no one near me. I spun around, trying to catch something in the corner of my eye. There was nothing there, just furniture and dim light. I started thinking that maybe I should leave the apartment for a while. The next morning, I grabbed some clothes and decided to stay in a hotel. I packed a small bag and went to the door. Before I left, I checked the bathroom mirror again. The prints were still there. I didn't touch them. I left the apartment, took the elevator down, and walked out into the cold street. I stayed in a hotel nearby. It was a cheap place, but it was quiet. I slept better that night. In the morning, I returned to my apartment to check things. I hoped that maybe whatever it was had left. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was that my couch had been pushed a few inches forward. My kitchen drawers were all slightly open. I closed them and felt my heart pounding. The mist was back. I stood in the living room looking up and said, "I don't understand what you want." I waited, feeling my throat tighten. The smell was sour, sweet, and strong. I coughed. I heard that muffled laughter again. It sounded like someone standing right behind me trying not to laugh too loudly. I whipped around, ready to see someone, but I saw nothing. I ran my hand over my face and through my hair. I sat down on the floor and just stared at the empty space. Over the following days, I tried various things. I tried opening all the windows. The mist still hung around. I tried leaving the lights on or off. It didn't matter. The objects kept moving. The doorbell still rang at random times. The handprints kept appearing on the bathroom mirror. I tried cleaning them again using a stronger cleaner. I scrubbed until my arms were sore. The prints faded, but came back the next day. I placed tape on the doorbell outside to see if someone was pressing it. The tape remained untouched, but the bell still rang. I was losing my sense of comfort in my own home. My shoulders were always tense. I jumped at small sounds. I kept expecting something to touch me. Sometimes I thought I felt a light brush on my back, but when I turned, nothing was there. I tried recording the apartment with my phone. I set it up on a shelf and recorded for hours, hoping to catch something on video. I watched the footage later. I saw objects move slightly, shift an inch or two, but I never saw anything grabbing them. I saw the mist on camera, but it looked even less defined in the video, just a haze near the ceiling. I called the landlord and asked if there were any issues with ventilation. He sounded annoyed and said everything was fine. I considered calling a specialist, someone who deals with strange phenomena, but I was embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to think I was going crazy. I tried to keep calm and keep living there, but it was getting harder. Every night I heard quiet laughter, the doorbell rang, or something moved. One afternoon while I was sitting at the kitchen table, my plate slid a few inches toward the edge. I grabbed it before it fell. I said out loud, "Stop it." I got no answer, just a faint giggle. My body reacted to all this with sweat, trembling, and a constant tightness in my chest. I found myself breathing faster, pacing around the apartment, checking each room, opening closets, looking behind the shower curtain. I never found anyone. I tried hitting the walls with my fists to see if they were hollow or if some hidden door existed. Everything was solid. A few nights later, I decided to try something else. I sat in the middle of the living room floor, turned off the TV, set my phone to record again, and just waited. The mist gathered in the corners as usual. The smell was there. I said, "I know you can hear me. I want you to leave me alone. I'm not going anywhere. I live here." There was no sound at first. Then I heard that muffled laughter again. It was louder this time, like someone covering their mouth but still laughing. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I shouted, "Answer me." Instead of words, I heard breathing in a low throat-clearing sound as if someone was right next to me. I reached out into the empty air. I touched nothing. After this, the doorbell rang twice in a row. I ignored it. I stayed in my spot. I said, Stop moving my things. The laughter stopped for a moment. The mist shifted, making slow circular patterns near the ceiling. I stood up and looked around the room. The air felt heavier. I walked to my bedroom and looked inside. My bed was slightly off-center, as if pushed back by a few inches. I went to straighten it, pulling it back into place. I heard a scrape in the kitchen. I rushed there. One of the chairs at the table had moved away from the table. I pushed it back in. I said enough. I was breathing hard. My throat was dry. My heart pounded. I turned on every light in the apartment. The bright lights made the mist harder to see, but I knew it was still there. I spent the next hour trying to ignore it. I ate a simple meal, tried to watch TV, and avoided talking to it. Occasionally I would hear a faint giggle or the doorbell would ring once. The handprints on the bathroom mirror were back by the time I went to brush my teeth before bed. I cleaned them off again. They returned the next morning. I never got a clear explanation. I never heard a voice speak words, only laughter and breathing. I never saw a solid figure, only shapes in the mist. The handprints and moving objects never stopped entirely. After a few weeks, I learned to live with it. I stopped reacting every time something moved, and I stopped yelling at the mist. I tried to carry on with normal life. I kept the apartment cleaner, double-checked where I left my belongings, and kept a close eye on the bathroom mirror. The doorbell rang less often over time, but it never stopped completely. Sometimes, late at night when I was half asleep, I would hear that muffled laughter drifting through the apartment. I would feel my skin crawl, and I would pull my blanket tighter around me. I never told anyone else. I guess I just adapted. The mist never harmed me. It never destroyed anything. It only moved things, rang the bell, and left prints on the mirror. I kept laughing. I still don't know what it was. I just know it was there. I learned to live with it because I had nowhere else to go. I still smell that sour sweet odor sometimes, and I still see shapes in the corners at night. It's just the way things are now. I remember the first night I heard that door latch move. I was sitting alone in my living room, trying to relax, but my attention kept going back to the small wooden cabinet I had brought home earlier that day. It was an old piece I picked up at a second-hand store a few miles from my apartment. It looked sturdy from the outside, with faded paint and a few scratches near the hinges, but its old-fashioned design had caught my eye. I had thought it might fit nicely in a corner of my living room, maybe hold a few books or some boxes. It was nothing special, but something about it interested me when I saw it at the store. Now sitting in silence, I could hear its latch inside the door shifting on its own, even though I had locked it. I got up and approached it. It was about chest height. The outside felt rough to the touch, and the surface smelled like old varnish, maybe a bit of musty wood. I pulled at the handle. I had locked it earlier using the small key that came with it, but I decided to open it and check inside. The key turned without any resistance. When I pulled the door open, it gave off a slight creak. The inside was dark. I reached for my flashlight, switched it on, and aimed it inside. I expected to see a couple of shells, and maybe some leftover dust. Instead, I saw nothing but darkness. There was an odd impression that the inside was deeper than it should be. I tried to see the back panel, but the light seemed to fade before hitting anything. I stepped back and tried to shake off the feeling. I thought maybe the interior was painted a dark color, or maybe there was some weird angle that made the flashlight beam look odd. Still, the latch moving on its own bothered me. I checked the hinges. They were tight. The lock mechanism seemed simple. I shut the door again, locked it, and tapped the outside. It felt solid. I tried not to think about it too much. I turned on the TV, hoping some background noise would help me relax. That night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. I do not usually wake up in the middle of the night, but something made me sit up. My bedroom door was open, and I could see the corner of the living room. The cabinet was there. My heart felt heavier than usual. I listened. I could hear a faint clicking sound like metal against metal. I switched on my bedside lamp and walked slowly to the living room. The cabinet's latch was turning. The door was still closed. I stood in front of it, watching the metal piece rotate on its own. It moved slowly, making that slight scraping sound. I touched it, and it stopped. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a loose part. Maybe the temperature changes at night made the metal expand or contract. I tried pulling the door open again, but this time it resisted. I used the key and it turned easily. The door swung open. Again, I saw that black void. I reached in with my hand, expecting to touch the back panel. My arm went in almost up to my elbow. There was no back panel. I felt only cool, still air. I pulled my hand out quickly. There was no smell.
No breeze.
Nothing. I shut the door. I locked it. I went back to bed, but my sleep was restless. The next morning, I checked the cabinet carefully. I moved it away from the wall, expecting to see a trick or a compartment. The back was intact. It looked normal from outside. I tapped the back with my knuckles. It was solid wood, no hollow sections. I moved the cabinet again and opened the door. Inside, nothing had changed, just that dark space. I tried shining a stronger flashlight and leaned in carefully. At the far end, I thought I saw a tiny reflection. It looked like a small, bright point. It resembled an eye catching the lights. I felt nervous. I closed the door again. Throughout the day, I tried to ignore it. I had work to do on my laptop, and I managed to keep busy until late afternoon. But every time I took a break, I caught myself staring at the cabinet. Sometimes I thought I heard a faint sound from inside, like distant scratching or a soft tapping. By evening, I decided to look inside once more. I waited until the sun went down. I turned on all the lights in the living room, grabbed my flashlight, and unlocked the cabinet. The darkness inside felt different this time. It seemed deeper. I leaned in and aimed the flashlight downward, upward, and to the sides. The beam disappeared into the blackness. Then I saw that bright point again. I focused my flashlight on it. It was small and reflective. It seemed to be watching me. The hair on my arms rose. My stomach tightened. I called out even though it felt stupid. "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded normal, just a bit shaky. There was no response. Just silence. I tried reaching in again with my hand, but stopped halfway. I pulled my hand back and closed the door. For the next few days, things got worse. At night, the latch kept turning. Sometimes I woke up to the sound of the door creaking. I always found it locked, but I had this feeling that something inside wanted to come out. The cabinet seemed heavier each time I tried to move it. I wanted to get rid of it, but also felt curious. The next afternoon, I brought a tape measure and a notepad. I measured the outside dimensions, height, width, and depth. Everything looked normal. Then I opened the door and tried to measure the inside. I reached in with the tape measure, holding it at the edge. The tape extended far beyond where the back panel should have been. I pulled it out and checked the length. It was longer than the cabinet's depth by at least 3 or 4 feet. I tried again, pushing the tape measure inside, keeping the flashlight aimed along it. The flashlight beam just ended in darkness. I couldn't understand it. I pressed my ear against the interior edge. I heard a soft sound like breathing. I pulled back quickly. My heart was pounding. I slammed the door shut and locked it. That night, I woke up again. This time, I heard the cabinet door rattling. The latch was moving more aggressively. I walked into the living room, turned on all the lights, and stood facing the cabinet. My legs felt weak. My hands were shaking. I told myself to stay calm. I held the key in my hand and listened. The latch clicked slowly. I tried to talk, hoping I would feel less scared. "I know you're in there," I said quietly. I didn't know who or what I was talking to. The rattling stopped. I touched the door. It was cold. I knelt down and pressed my ear against it. I heard a low scraping sound from inside. I decided to leave it locked that night. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. In the morning, I woke up feeling tense. My neck was stiff. I walked into the living room. The cabinet door was slightly ajar, even though I knew I had locked it. I checked the lock. The key was on my nightstand. I never left it anywhere else. Somehow, the cabinet door had opened a crack. I pulled it open. Inside, the darkness felt heavier. I reached in with a broom handle, expecting to hit the back. The handle just disappeared inside until I almost lost my grip on it. I pulled it out quickly. As I backed away, I heard a faint whisper-like sound coming from the cabinet. It didn't form words, just a faint rustle of air. I placed a chair against the door and put some heavy books on top of the cabinet. I hoped that would keep it closed. I decided to go out for a while to clear my head. I spent a few hours at a nearby coffee shop trying to distract myself, but my mind kept going back to the cabinet. When I returned, it was late afternoon. My apartment felt stuffy and quiet. The cabinet stood in the same corner. The chair and books were still there. I checked the door. It was closed. I removed the books and the chair, took a deep breath, and opened it again. This time I shined my flashlight inside for a solid minute. I tried to hold the beam steady, I saw that reflective point again. It was larger now, or maybe closer. It reminded me of an animal's eye reflecting light at night, but I could see no shape, no outline, just that small bright point. I whispered, "What do you want?" There was no answer, just a soft clicking sound. I closed the door and locked it. Over the next few days, the cabinet changed in subtle ways. The hinges looked newer. The wood on the inside edge felt smoother, as if it had been sanded overnight. The darkness inside seemed to push outward. Each time I opened the door, I sensed more space inside. At one point, I even tried to stick my head inside while holding the flashlights. When I did that, I felt a sudden rush of cold air. My eyes watered. I pulled back, hit my head on the cabinet's frame, and cursed out loud. I wiped my eyes and closed the door again. At night, I stopped sleeping well. Every sound made me jump. The cabinet door latch would click at random times. Sometimes I stand in front of it for an hour, waiting to see if it would open by itself. It never did while I watched, but if I turned my back for a minute, I'd hear a scraping sound. When I turned around, nothing had changed. Still, I noticed that the cabinet seemed slightly angled one morning, as if the floor under it had shifted. I tried to level it, but it stayed crooked. I decided to get rid of it. I tried to drag it out of my apartment. I pulled and strained, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was anchored to the floor. The wood of the cabinet's feet looked normal, but it wouldn't slide or lift. I tried using a crowbar at the edge, but the tool slipped off. My palms were sweating. I kicked the cabinet in frustration. I shouted, "Just let me get rid of you." My voice echoed in the quiet apartment. That night I heard a new sound, a low groan coming from inside the cabinet. I approached it and felt a vibration through the floor. I backed away and leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I could smell something faint now, like damp earth. I checked all my windows. They were closed. The smell was coming from the cabinet. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or the landlord, but what would I say? There's a cabinet in my living room that leads somewhere else. It sounded crazy. I decided to handle it myself. I got my toolbox. I had a drill and some screws. I decided to seal the door shut from the outside. I pressed the cabinet door closed and drilled 3 screws along the edge. The drill slipped a couple of times because my hands were shaking. After I finished, I stepped back and stared at the sealed door. I could still hear faint noises inside. I sat on my couch and kept my eyes on it. After a few minutes, the latch started turning again. The door rattled, but it stayed closed. I watched the screws bend slightly. One of them popped out and fell to the floor. I cursed and grabbed a hammer. I nailed a piece of wood across the door. The rattling continued, making the wood vibrate. I spent the next hour reinforcing the door. I nailed 2 more pieces of wood across it. I pushed a bookshelf against it. I stacked some heavy boxes. By the time I finished, I was sweating. My heart was beating fast. I could still hear sounds coming from inside, like soft scratching. I sat on the couch and waited. Minutes passed, then hours. The sounds eventually stopped. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I checked a makeshift barricade. Everything was still in place. The apartment was quiet. I listened carefully. I heard nothing from inside the cabinet. I got down on my knees and pressed my ear against the barricade. No sound. I removed a couple of boxes and the bookshelf. I tapped the wood planks. They felt solid. I considered leaving them there forever. Over the next few days, I watched the cabinet from a distance. It remained quiet. I no longer heard the latch turning. I slept a bit better. The smell of damp earth faded. Still, I was nervous. I knew something was in there. I couldn't see it, but I knew it existed. I felt it in the silence. I wondered if it was waiting for me to let my guard down. A week later, I decided to try something else. I brought a small mirror and flashlight. I wanted to see if the inside had changed. I removed the bookshelf and a few planks carefully. I left the door sealed except for one corner where I could shine the light in. When I did, I saw only darkness. I tried angling the mirror. For a second, I caught a glimpse of that bright point again. It was closer now. It flickered once and then disappeared. I felt a surge of panic and hammered the wood planks back into place. After that, I decided not to look again. I ended up moving the entire setup, cabinet, and barricade into a corner and covering it with a large sheet. I tried to forget about it. It did not rattle anymore, but I often felt uneasy in my apartment. Sometimes I caught myself looking at the covered shape in the corner, expecting it to move or shift. Nothing happened. I stopped checking inside. I left it sealed. I never tried to open it again. I figured that whatever was inside could stay there. I considered calling someone to haul it away, but I doubted they would be able to move it. Besides, I did not want to explain what was happening. My best solution was to leave it as it was. It stayed silent. Over time, I learned to ignore it. Sometimes late at night, I thought I heard a faint click, but I never saw the latch move again. I kept my distance. I ate, slept, and went about my life, pretending that the cabinet was just an old piece of furniture I never used. I still knew something was inside, but it never came out. I did not open the door again. I still have the key, but I keep it buried deep in a drawer and do not plan to use it. I remember the first time I noticed something wrong with my shadow. It was a late afternoon in my classroom, and I was leaning over a table, adjusting some dried brushes and empty jars. The light on the floor came from the high windows behind me. My shadow should have stretched along the floor, straight and simple. Instead, it appeared to be arms and torso that shifted, as if trying to point at something. I straightened up fast. I looked around, trying to see if something else in the room caused that effect. Maybe a reflection on the floor. Nothing explained it. My heart thumped in my chest, and I felt sweat forming under my arms. I went home that day feeling uneasy, my shoulders tight and my mind refusing to settle. At home, I stood by the bathroom door with the light behind me and stared at my shadow on the tile floor. It looked normal at first, then I moved my arm and it moved exactly the same. I did small tests, tilting my head, stepping sideways, but it followed me. After a few minutes of testing, I gave up and felt kind of stupid. I made dinner, a simple sandwich, and sat on the couch in front of the TV. The screen lit up the wall behind me and I turned to look at my shadow once more. It was just me on the wall, nothing strange. I decided I had just imagined it at school. The next day I taught my morning class as usual. I told my students to draw a pile of random objects placed in the center of the table. I circled the room, looking at their work. The classroom had that bright natural light again. At one point I leaned over a student's shoulder to check his drawing. I caught sight of my shadow on the floor. Its arms seemed longer, twisted slightly at the elbows. My heart rate went up right away. I stood up and pretended I had to go check something on my desk. While walking, I glanced down. My shadow's legs stretched too far behind me, like they belonged to someone taller. I tried walking faster, but the shape on the floor hesitated. It didn't match my steps exactly. I felt a chill on my back. I cleared my throat and told everyone class was over early, claiming I didn't feel well. In the afternoon, I stayed in my empty classroom and watched the shadow as the sun moved. I tried tapping my foot. The shadow's foot tapped, but a split second slower. I reached out my arm. The shadow did too, but for a brief second it moved in a different direction before matching mine. I noticed it sometimes stretched toward the door at the end of the hallway. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I decided to follow that direction. I packed my bag and left the classroom, walking slowly down the hallway. I looked behind me. My shadow on the floor under the hallway lights looked strange, as if trying to point toward a closed door that led to a storage room. I stopped in front of that door. It was locked. I tried the handle and then gave up. I didn't have permission to open these storage spaces, which were managed by the staff. I left the building feeling a tightness in my stomach. That night at home, I couldn't relax. I sat in my kitchen with only one light on. My shadow fell across the floor and partially up the wall. I kept my eyes on it. At one point, my phone buzzed, and I looked down for just a second. When I looked up, my shadow was gone. I jerked upright, my heart pounding. There was light in the room, so I should have had a shadow. I turned around, trying to see if I had simply lost track of it. It wasn't behind me or on the floor. I flicked on another light, and there it was, on the far wall by the door to my bedroom. I stared hard at it. It didn't move, but I felt something strange, as if it were waiting for me to follow. I took a step, and it slid along the wall into my bedroom, disappearing behind the door frame. My breathing got heavier. I opened the door and stepped inside, turning on the lights. The room was empty. My shadow reappeared on the floor behind me as if I had never lost it. I stood there shaking. I had no idea what was happening. I tried to ignore it for a few days. I focused on my work. I avoided looking at the floor in the classroom. I kept lights off at home whenever possible. But one evening, as I was reading some papers at my desk, I noticed something on the wall. My shadow was on the move again, sliding along the corridor outside my home office. I could see it through the open door, cast by a lamp in the living room. It stretched along the hallway, reaching the door to my small storage room. The handle there rattled like someone was trying to open it. I couldn't see anyone in the hall. I walked slowly, holding my breath. The handle stopped rattling, and my shadow appeared flat on the floor by my feet. My knees felt weak. I pushed the door open. Inside that storage room, nothing seemed out of place. Cardboard boxes, an old suitcase, some rolled-up canvases. I switched on the lights. My shadow stayed still. I searched through the boxes. I found old painting tools, some leftover fabrics, a few frames, nothing unusual. I backed out and closed the door. My shadow followed me back to the office without any sign of disturbance. But I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake, my heart thumping whenever I remembered the handle moving on its own. The following night it got worse. I had trouble focusing on anything. I tried to sit quietly on my couch with a dim table lamp on. I saw my shadow on the floor, normal at first. Then, without any warning, it stretched up the wall and into the kitchen. I jumped up. The kitchen was dark. I could see its faint shape on the white tiles as if it tried to push open a cabinet door. I rushed over and switched on the kitchen lights. The shadow shot back behind me and became normal again. I opened that cabinet. It held glasses, plates, and old mugs. I closed it, breathing fast. My forehead felt hot and my palms were damp. I left all the lights on and walked from room to room, watching carefully. Several times I caught the shadow drifting ahead of me, disappearing around corners as if checking other rooms. Each time I turned on the lights, I found nothing strange. Eventually I sat on my bed, too tired to stand. My shadow was beside me, quiet. I stayed awake until morning. I started following it more deliberately. Whenever I saw the shadow stretch or points, I tried to go where it indicated. At school, I followed it down hallways to locked doors and empty storage spaces. In my apartment building, it guided me to the basement one afternoon. I stood there in the dim light looking around at old junk and cleaning supplies. My shadow stretched across the concrete floor and stopped near a large locked cabinet. I tried to open it, but it was secured. I only managed to confirm that it was full of random materials. I returned upstairs. Later that night, the shadow tried to show me a corner behind my TV stand. I pulled the TV away from the wall. I found nothing but dust and a loose cable. Frustration built up inside me. My stomach cramped. I breathed through my nose and tried to calm myself. I thought about seeing a doctor or telling someone, but who would believe me? One evening, I was in the school after hours grading some sketches. The overhead lights were off and only a desk lamp was on. The shadow appeared on the far wall, not attached to me in the normal way. It stretched upward and seemed to point toward the corridor outside. I walked quietly, my shoes squeaking softly on the floor. In the hallway, the emergency lights were on, creating dim patches of light. I saw my shadow move ahead of me, slipping under a doorway into a classroom used for storage. I followed, pushing the door open. Inside, there were shelves of old paints, brushes, and canvases. The shadow was on the back wall, near a large painting covered by a sheet. I turned on the small lamp in the room and approached. The shadow stayed right behind me now. I pulled the sheet off. Underneath was a large canvas, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet. It showed a messy scene of abstract lines and shapes. There were dark areas and strange forms that looked like nothing in particular. It did not remind me of any student's work. I tried to lift it, but it was heavier than I expected. Behind the canvas, I found a sealed box. I set the painting aside and examined the box. It was made of wood and locked with a small latch. I searched the room and found a thin metal tool that I used to pry it open. Inside were old photographs and a few letters. I glanced through them quickly. They seemed to belong to a previous art teacher who worked here long before my time. There were no names I recognized. I felt a slight disappointment. I put the box down and looked at my shadow. It was normal now, on the floor behind me. At home, I continued to see the shadow act strangely. Some nights it walked alone into my bathroom. I would find the shower curtain swaying slightly, though the window was closed. Other nights, it dragged itself along the hallway floor, pausing near the apartment door as if waiting for me to open it. When I opened the door, it would move into the hallway outside my apartment, leading me to the stairwell or the laundry room, only to find nothing special, just the same old building. Over the following weeks, I had trouble eating. I felt restless. My neck and shoulders ached. I jumped at small noises. I tried leaving all the lights on and even sleeping with the lamp lit. The shadow still found ways to move where it wanted. Sometimes I caught it lingering behind furniture as if it were searching for something. I checked every corner of my place. I found nothing that made sense. Each new location it pointed me to was empty or filled with common items. I realized I needed to confront it directly. One night I turned off all the lights except one lamp in the living room. I stood there and faced the wall where I expected to see my shadow. I said out loud that I wanted it to stop. My voice came out shaky and quiet. I waited, breathing fast, my heart pounding. The shadow stretched up the wall, slowly bending at where its head would be. It looked like it was trying to reach the ceiling. I stepped back. It slid toward my bedroom again. I followed. Inside the bedroom, it stretched along the floor until it reached my nightstand. I opened the drawer and found a small old notebook I had forgotten about. It was a place where I once wrote notes about my art projects. I flipped through it. Inside, I had listed some old painting techniques and addresses of art supply stores I used to visit. I did not see anything unusual. The shadow did not move. I sat on the bed and waited. After a few minutes, it crawled along the floor, heading toward my closet. I followed and opened the door. Inside were clothes, shoes, and a few boxes of old materials. I pulled them out and checked each one. I found old sketches, broken pencils, dried tubes of paint, and a dusty old postcard from a city I had visited years ago. I placed everything on the floor, feeling my throat tighten. The shadow hovered by the wall, as if waiting. I showed it each item. I spoke softly, describing what I found. When I finished, it settled down behind me, matching my outline. The next evening, it guided me again to the same storage room at school. This time, I did not find anything new. I turned the light off and on, hoping to catch it doing something different. It only waited. I noticed that when I pulled open drawers and cabinets, my shadow slowed down as if calmer. After a while, I realized something. The shadow wasn't looking for a particular object. It just wanted me to keep searching, opening, and checking. I felt anger rising in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I stomped out of the room, locked it, and walked down the hall. The shadow followed me on the floor. I could see it under the dim lights. It didn't point anywhere now. It stayed close behind me, stretching only slightly now and then. Over the next week, I tried ignoring its signals. If it tried to point somewhere, I refused to follow. At night, I kept my eyes on my phone or on my dinner plate, forcing myself not to watch the walls. I still saw it from the corner of my eye, sliding under doors or up the wall. But I didn't move. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to remain still. Eventually it stopped trying to wander far. It stayed by my feet, quiet and still. At school, it moved with me normally. At home, it stayed in place. I noticed I slept better and my shoulders felt less tense. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I caught a glimpse of it moving slightly. I froze, toothbrush in my mouth. The shadow stretched along the tile floor behind me, reaching toward the sink's cabinet. I opened it. There were towels, soap, some cleaning supplies. I sighed and closed it. I turned off the bathroom lights. In the dark, I felt my heart steady. I turned the light back on. My shadow was just behind me. Normal. I nodded to myself and left the bathroom. Now the shadow still acts strange sometimes, but less often. When it tries to point me somewhere, I quickly check and find nothing, then return to what I was doing. I cannot fully explain what happened, but at least I have a routine again. I can sleep, eat, work, and function. The shadow does not control me. It still tries sometimes, but I do not let it lead me all over the building or rummage through every storage room. When it reaches towards some empty corner, I just walk away. It always returns to my side. It cannot leave me for long, and it cannot speak. It shows me places that do not matter. I stand my ground, breathe normally, and get on with my day. I remember that night in the forest because it still makes my stomach tighten. I decided to camp out there to avoid the noise of the city. I wanted peace and quiet, maybe a chance to think without traffic and strangers crowding me. I drove for a few hours until I reached a spot far from paved roads. I parked, grabbed my gear, and walked along a narrow trail until I found a small clearing. It wasn't a perfect place, but it looked fine. There were tall trees with thick trunks and dense foliage overhead. The ground was uneven, covered in dried leaves and small branches. I could smell damp moss. It was late afternoon when I set up my tent. I lit a small camp stove and heated a can of soup. and sat on a folding stool and drank water straight from a plastic bottle. I had no big plans. I just wanted to sleep early and wake up feeling rested. When darkness came, I zipped myself inside the tent. It was one of those small tents that barely fit one person, but I didn't mind. The night air was cool but not cold. I turned off my headlamp and lay on my sleeping bag, staring at the darkness. For the first hour or so, I heard only the distant rustle of leaves and an occasional snap of a twig. There were no animal sounds, no distant voices, no cars, no planes. It was quiet, like I wanted though. Maybe too quiet. I guess I'm used to some level of background noise. At some point I started drifting off. My eyes were closed and I could feel my muscles relaxing. That's when I heard them. Voices, soft and muffled, but definitely there. I opened my eyes wide. My ears strained. My heart rate jumped a bit. I thought maybe it was people talking far away. I stayed still, breathing quietly. The voices were close, like just outside the tent fabric, maybe a foot or two away, whispering. At first I couldn't make out words. I just caught the tone. The voices were low and calm, not angry or excited. Then I caught bits of sentences, fragments about me. They mentioned small details, like the color of my shirt, how I had parked my car, how I had struggled to drive stick shift back in my early 20s. They mentioned a mistake I made at work once, something I never told anyone, not even my family. I heard my old street name from when I was a kid, my old apartment number. I heard my nickname from high school, the one I never used again after moving to a new city. I sat up and felt my neck muscles tensing. My ears got hot. I could feel sweat collecting under my arms and on my forehead. My breathing became shallow. I looked around inside my tent, but obviously it was just me. I reached for my flashlight. I kept it off for a moment, hoping maybe the voices would reveal themselves. I tried to move slowly. The material of my sleeping bag made a slight rustling sound. The voices outside paused as if they heard me. I froze. After a few seconds, they started again, still whispering. They mentioned my tendency to avoid phone calls. They said something about leaving the city because I hated being around too many people. They repeated words I remembered hearing in old conversations with an ex-girlfriend. They talked about how I always felt awkward at parties. They knew way too much. My throat felt dry. My fingers tingled. I had no idea who could be out there. I hadn't seen anyone on the way. I didn't see a single parked car near the trail. I tried to think. Maybe some people followed me. Maybe locals had spotted me and were playing a prank. I didn't like the idea of going out alone in the dark, but staying inside felt worse. I needed to face whatever it was, or at least see it. I unzipped the tent flap slowly. The zipper's teeth sounded loud in my ears as I tried to peer out. I saw the black silhouettes of trees against a lighter gray sky. The moon wasn't full, but it gave just enough light to see shapes. I didn't see any people or light sources. I stuck my head out and listened. The voices stopped the moment I looked outside. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice sounded thin and shaky. There was no response, just silence. I shined my flashlight around. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trunks of trees. Rough bark, leaves on the ground, scattered branches, nothing else. I stepped out, my legs a bit unsteady. I circled the tent, moving the flashlight in slow arcs. There were no footprints or signs of anyone crouching behind bushes. I walked a few steps away and turned around. It's when I noticed something strange. The trees seemed to lean in my direction, as if they were curving toward me. I hadn't noticed that when I arrived. I stepped closer to one tree and aimed the light at it. The trunk looked solid, brownish, with cracks in the bark. Nothing unusual, but from a few feet back, it looked bent toward me. I looked at the ground. Among the roots there were patterns. It looked like the roots had risen slightly, forming shapes or letters. I tried to read them, but couldn't make sense of it. The roots didn't appear to be English or any language I knew. They formed lines and curves. I knelt and touched them. The roots were firm and cool to the touch. They didn't move. I stood up and backed away. I felt the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I went back inside my tent and zipped it up. I wanted to pretend I didn't hear anything, that it was all in my head. But the silence outside felt heavy. My breathing was loud to my own ears. I lay down and tried to calm myself. After a few minutes, I thought I heard something again. This time it was a single voice whispering my last name. My eyes darted to the tent walls. The voice came from behind me. I turned over carefully not to make too much noise. The voice said something about my habit of avoiding eye contact with strangers. It said it quietly but clearly. I felt my stomach turn. My hands started to shake. I gritted my teeth. I didn't know what to do. I whispered, "Stop." The voice went quiet. I stayed still for a long time. Maybe an hour. My legs grew stiff. My temples throbbed. Eventually, I slowly unzipped the tent again and stepped outside, holding my flashlight ready. I walked around the campsite, shining the light on everything. My breathing was fast and shallow. I kept expecting to see someone behind a tree, but I saw nothing. Just trees that seemed off as if they were angled in unnatural ways. Their branches looked like arms reaching out. The roots on the ground looked like twisted fingers pointing upward. I avoided looking too long at any single tree because my eyes were playing tricks on me. I tried to listen carefully. The forest itself was quiet. No wind, no animal calls, no footsteps. I could hear my own heartbeat. I moved farther from my tent, just a few yards. The ground felt uneven. Leaves rustled under my boots as I crouched down to see if there were any footprints. Nothing. The soil was soft, but I didn't see any shoe prints except mine. I breathed out slowly. I decided to speak out loud. "I know you're here," I said. "I can hear you. Show yourselves." My voice sounded hoarse. I waited. Nothing. I said again louder, "Come on." Still nothing. I felt my chest tightening and the muscles in my back burning. I was nervous. I decided to walk around the immediate area. Maybe I would find a clue, but I found nothing but the same odd arrangement of roots near some trees. The roots seemed to form patterns. Each pattern was different. Some looked like curved lines crossing each other, while others were shaped like bent hooks or loops. I tried to shine my flashlight at different angles, but I couldn't make out any clear message. After a while, I realized I was wasting energy. I returned to the tent. I got inside, zipped it up, and sat there hugging my knees. I tried to listen. The voices didn't return immediately. I started to think that maybe I should leave. But it was the middle of the night, and I didn't want to hike back in the dark. The trail wasn't well marked, and I could get lost. My car was at least an hour's walk away. Leaving right then was risky. I also felt weak and shaky, having hadn't slept much. I thought about staying awake until sunrise. I turned off the flashlight and sat in the dark. I listened to my breathing, in and out. After maybe 15 minutes, the whispering returned. This time it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. It was like a circle of voices around my tent. They spoke quietly, but I could catch fragments. They said I was always too quiet. They said I was afraid of people. They said I never liked crowds. They said I came here to escape, but I couldn't escape myself. They mentioned details about my old jobs, my old apartments, times I stumbled in front of strangers, and times I avoided saying hello to neighbors. They spoke as if they knew every detail of my life, every small embarrassment. My head started to pound. I felt my face getting hot. My chest was tight. My hands were clenched so hard and my knuckles hurt. I yelled, "Shut up!" My voice sounded strained. The voices stopped for a second, then whispered again, but quieter. I grabbed the tent zipper and yanked it down. I stuck my head outside and said, "What do you want?" My voice cracked. Nothing answered. I shone my flashlight wildly around. The trees looked still, but I knew they were not normal. I felt panic rising inside me. I wanted to run, but I knew running blindly into the forest at night would be stupid. I backed into the tent and zipped it up again. I sat down, hunched over, trying to think of a plan. I decided to pack up and leave at first light. I couldn't stay another day. I didn't care about the peacefulness anymore. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong. I tried to pass the time by counting my breaths. I closed my eyes and listened carefully. When the voices came back, I tried not to react. I tried to ignore them. They whispered about my past again, naming people I hadn't thought about in years. They mentioned mistakes I made long ago, times I felt ashamed. They repeated words and names with careful pronunciation. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat. My arms felt tense, and my back hurt. At some point, I crawled out of the sleeping bag and got on my knees. I rummaged through my backpack, grabbed a protein bar and a bottle of water, and forced myself to eat and drink. My jaw was tense, and I had to work at chewing. The forest out stayed quiet, except for those occasional whispers. They never got louder, they never shouted, just lingered, soft and insistent. I tried shouting questions at them. Who are you? Why are you doing this? I got no response that made sense. They just kept commenting on my life. They never addressed me directly beyond stating facts. It was like they were having a discussion about me, but not with me. When I tried to listen very closely, I noticed some voices had different pitches. One was lower, one was a bit higher, and one sounded raspy. It was like a group of people just out of sight discussing personal details from my life. I wondered how they knew these things, but I had no way to find out. I had no clues. I stayed like that for hours. I kept expecting something else to happen, but it didn't. The voices kept going, sometimes fading away, sometimes returning. They never laughed. They never sounded angry. They just sounded interested, as if studying me. My heart never fully calmed down. My body stayed on edge. My throat was dry no matter how much water I drank. Eventually, I noticed that the sky outside was getting lighter. The darkness was turning into a pale blue. I checked my watch. It was almost dawn. The voices became quieter. I unzipped the tent again and looked outside. The trees looked normal now, as if they were straight and tall. I still saw odd shapes in the roots, but they looked less like writing and more like random patterns of wood and dirt. I didn't trust my eyes. I stepped out and walked around slowly. I looked for footprints again. Nothing. The forest looked empty. The only sound was a slight breeze moving through the leaves. I packed my tent quickly. My hands shook a bit, but I managed to roll up the fabric and stuff it into my pack. I didn't eat breakfast. I just wanted to leave. I slung my backpack over my shoulders and held my flashlight in one hand, even though it was getting brighter by the minute. I found the trail and started walking back the way I came. Every few steps I checked behind me. I saw only trees and bushes. I didn't hear any voices. My legs felt shaky, but I forced myself to keep going. After a while, I reached my car. It was still there, undisturbed. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I drove away, looking in the rearview mirror now and then, expecting to see something behind me. But I saw only empty road and trees in the distance. When I finally got back to a main road, I pulled over at a small gas station and stepped out. I felt sore. My shoulders ached. I looked at myself in the car window. My face looked tired, my eyes were red, and my cheeks felt stiff. I didn't understand what happened in that forest. I had no explanation. I only knew that I never wanted to go back. I just wanted to get home, lock my door, and try to forget about it. I haven't returned to any forest since that night, and I don't plan to. It's not worth the quiet. I remember the first time I saw the mansion. I stood on the gravel driveway in the afternoon light, holding a small clipboard under my arm, feeling the uneven stones under my shoes. The place was quiet. The front door was shut. The windows looked dusty, and many were boarded up. I had been asked by a local developer to check the structural integrity before any sale or renovation. I did not know who owned it. I did not ask. I was there to do a quick inspection, write a short report, and leave. That was all. I had expected loose floorboards, cracks in the foundation, maybe some mold. I had not expected what I found inside. I pushed the heavy front door, which had a stiff latch. It moved with a loud scraping sound. The air inside smelled of old wood and damp plaster. I stepped into a large foyer. The ceiling was high, and I could see dusty light filtering in from a narrow stained glass window, high above the door. I tapped the walls with my knuckles. They felt solid. I walked forward, shining a small flashlight into the corners. At first I saw nothing unusual, just peeling wallpaper and worn wooden floors. I made a few notes on my clipboard. My footsteps echoed. I spoke my own name under my breath to keep myself focused. The silence felt odd. There was not a hint of traffic noise or rustling leaves. The place felt cut off. I stopped near what looked like a staircase in the center of the foyer. It rose in a gentle curve, and the steps were covered in a faded carpet. I leaned on the banister. It felt sturdy. I pressed my foot on the first step, hearing a slight creak. Everything seemed normal enough. I walked through a doorway into what seemed like a sitting room. There were no chairs, only some broken frames stacked against a wall. I saw a door on the other side and tried it. It opened onto a long hallway, much darker. I aimed my flashlight. The beam showed old sconces and flaking paint. I stepped in slowly, feeling the boards under my feet. The sound of my footsteps changed pitch as I walked. The hall seemed empty. After a few steps, I stopped. Something about the length of the hallway seemed off. I tried to picture the exterior of the building. The hallway seemed to extend too far. I shone my flashlight ahead, saw nothing but more doorways. I looked behind me. The door I had come through was still open, showing the sitting room. I felt a slight itch at the back of my neck. I took a deep breath and decided to head back and try the main staircase first. I wanted to get a sense of the upper floors. I returned to the foyer. The air felt heavier. Maybe I was just uneasy. I climbed the main stairs to the second floor. At the top, I found a corridor. Several doors branched off. I tried the first door on my left. Inside, there was a small bedroom with a single window boarded from the outside. The floor was plain. There was a wardrobe, empty and leaning on its side. I pulled it upright, not sure why, maybe just a feel for control. The room smelled stale. I stepped out and tried the next door. Another bedroom, similar condition, dusty floor, no furniture except a broken mirror. I tapped on the walls again, nothing strange. I continued down the corridor. At the end, I found a narrow door. When I opened it, I saw a spiral staircase going up. It was iron, with steps worn smooth. I had not seen any mention of a tower or extra level in the original plans I had been given. The house's exterior did not suggest such a structure. I aimed my flashlight upward, but I could not see where it ended. I listened. I heard nothing. It was completely silent. I stepped onto the first iron step. It felt stable. I went up. The steps made a slight metallic sound under my weight. After 20 or so steps, I expected to reach something. Another floor, a small attic, something. Instead, the staircase just kept going. I tried to estimate how high I had gone. By now, I should have poked through the roof, but I didn't see any skylight or exit. The walls around the staircase were close, dark, featureless. I couldn't see any doors or windows. I looked down. The foyer and corridor were no longer visible. It was as if the staircase floated in darkness. My breathing got faster. I stood still, shining the flashlight around. The beam showed only the iron steps and a nearby wall. I touched that wall. It felt like cold plaster. I kept going up. After another few dozen steps, I reached a small landing. It was a tiny platform with a door made of dark wood. I hadn't passed any windows or vents. There was no sign of the outside world. I tested the door's knob. It turned easily. I opened it and stepped inside a new hallway. I paused, shining the light around. The hallway looked like the one below, but there were small differences. The floor here had a strange pattern of tiles instead of wood. The walls had vertical panels that weren't present downstairs. I moved forward. I tried to keep track of the direction I knew I'd gone up. I tried the first door on my left. Inside, I found a large room with no furniture, just a wooden floor and a single beam of light coming from a high, narrow window. The window didn't look boarded. I crossed the room and tried to see out, but it was foggy outside, and I couldn't see any landscape. The glass was dirty. I tried to open the window. It didn't budge. I turned around to leave, but when I reached for the doorknob, something felt different. The door I had used was gone. The wall was solid. I pressed my palm on it. The wallpaper was damp and cold. I stood there, tense, trying to slow my breathing. I checked every inch of the wall where I thought the door had been nothing. I tapped, listening for hollow sounds. Everything felt solid. My heart rate went. I felt sweat on my forehead. I paced the room, checking each corner. I found another door on the opposite wall. I tried it. The knob turned and I stepped through into a corridor. I looked back, expecting to see the room. Instead, there was only a blank wall behind me. My flashlight flickered. I tapped it, and the beam steadied. I moved through this corridor, feeling the tiles on my feet. I noticed a smell, like damp earth. I walked slowly, sliding my hand along the wall to keep my bearings. The corridor turned sharply to the left. I followed it. I saw a set of steps going down. These were wooden, not iron. I descended, counting them. 1, 2, and so on. After 20 steps, I reached another door. It was painted a dull white, peeling at the edges. I tried it. It opened into what looked like the foyer again. But something was off. The front door was not in the same place I remembered. The windows were different shapes. The stairs I had used earlier were nowhere to be seen. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. No answer. I walked around the foyer, shining the light on every surface. I saw a hallway that should have led to the sitting room. Instead, it opened into a long, narrow corridor I did not recall seeing. I decided to try another approach. I would find the main entrance and leave. I just needed to keep calm and retrace my steps. I went to where I thought the front door should be. There was a door there, but it was heavy, made of metal. I tried the latch. It opened and led not outside, but into a small, empty room with a stone floor. I checked the walls of that room. They were rough and cold. I stepped back into the foyer. I tried another door. This one led into a kitchen with old cabinets and a sink filled with dirty water. I touched the faucet. It moved, but no water came out. I opened a drawer. Nothing was inside. I found a door at the back of the kitchen. I went through it expecting maybe a pantry or a back exit. Instead, I was back in a hallway with dark wallpaper. My flashlight showed peeling paint and some kind of mold. I realized my hands were shaking. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. I tried to stay calm. I told myself that the house might have a confusing layout. Maybe there were hidden passages. Maybe I was turned around. I tried to mark my path. I took out a small piece of chalk I carried in my pocket for marking structural notes. I drew a line on the wall near the door I had just come through. Then I walked forward a few steps, turned a corner, and found another door. I opened it and stepped through. I ended up in a room with no windows and a single pillar in the center. I drew another chalk mark near the door I used. I left that room by another door. Instead of a corridor, I entered a small hallway I had not seen before. I looked for my chalk marks. They were gone. The wall where I expected to see a chalk line was clean. I checked my pocket. The chalk was still there. I tried marking the wall again and watched as my chalk made a white line. Then I walked forward and came back. The line had vanished. My breathing became shallow. I felt my stomach tighten. I realized I could not rely on marking my way. I tried to keep track in my head instead. I forced myself to think of the original foyer, the staircase, the position of the rooms. None of it matched what I was seeing now. Every corridor seemed to twist. Every door led to unexpected spaces. Some rooms were large and empty. Some were cramped. I found a narrow staircase going down, hoping it would take me back to the ground floor. I followed it carefully, holding the railing. I reached the bottom and opened a door. Inside, I saw a hallway that looked exactly like the one upstairs. I recognized a pattern on the floor. I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. Focus. Just find a window. Break it if you have to. I checked every room I passed, looking for a window I could open or break. Many windows I found were either boarded or fogged over so thickly that I couldn't see through. Some rooms did not have windows at all. I tried a heavy wooden door at the end of one corridor. It led to a staircase I didn't recall. This staircase was not iron or wood. The steps were made of rough stone. I climbed them, hoping they would take me somewhere familiar. Each step made a scraping sound. I reached a landing with a single door. I opened it and found myself in a small space with slanted walls and a single hanging light bulb. The bulb didn't glow. I tapped it. Nothing. I moved on, opening another door. This time I stepped into what looked like the original foyer again. I recognized the stained glass window above. I rushed forward, relieved. I moved to the front door. It looked normal again. I put my hand on it. The latch clicked. I pulled. The door opened onto darkness. I saw no driveway, no outside world, just a black emptiness. I closed the door quickly. I felt my heart pounding. I tried to breathe slowly. I turned around. The foyer looked the same as before. The staircase was there. I put my foot on it, thinking maybe if I went upstairs and found that spiral staircase again, I could retrace my steps somehow. As I placed my foot on the step, I heard something. It was a soft sound. I listened carefully. It sounded like a voice. I froze, holding my breath. Then I heard it again. A whisper. It said my name. It was very quiet. I spun around, shining my flashlight on the walls. The light caught peeling wallpaper and dusty wood. I pressed my ear against the wall. I heard it again. My name, said in a low, steady whisper. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I backed away, holding the flashlight in front of me. I looked toward the hallway. I heard the whisper there as well. My name was said slowly. The voice was not loud. but it echoed slightly. I spoke out loud. "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. There was no answer, just the whisper. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. I walked towards the front door again, desperate to find a normal exit. I tried the door once more. I pulled it open. This time I saw a dim light outside, like a cloudy afternoon. I stepped forward carefully. My foot touched a wooden step. I realized I was not walking out of the house, but back onto that iron spiral staircase. I pulled back. I closed the door. I tried another door, the one that led to the sitting room. I opened it and saw another corridor that did not belong there. I slammed it shut. I felt a trembling in my legs. My throat was dry. I wiped my forehead again. I tried to ignore the whispers. I focused on finding a door that would lead outside. I knew the front door must face the driveway. I opened it a third time, trying to keep calm. I saw a dusty driveway this time. No spiral staircase. I saw the faint outline of the trees I remembered from outside. I saw the gravel. I stepped through quickly, holding the latch to keep my balance. My shoes touched the gravel. I looked back at the door. It was just a normal wooden door again, with no strange darkness behind it. I closed it gently. I walked down the driveway, feeling each stone under my feet. I didn't look back at the mansion until I reached my car. When I turned, I saw the same old structure. The windows looked empty. The boards were still there. Nothing was unusual from the outside. I felt the breeze on my face. I took several deep breaths. I put my flashlight and clipboard on the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel. I stared at the mansion for a while, checking if any lights came on inside. Nothing moved. After a long moment, I started the car and drove away. I didn't write a full report that day. I didn't return any calls. I kept the memory to myself for a while. Even now, I can still remember the sound of the whispers and the feel of the walls under my fingertips. I can remember how the house kept changing inside, room after room, corridor after corridor, and that staircase that led nowhere. And I remember leaving with a sense of relief, tasting the fresh air outside and never wanting to step inside that place again. I found that deck of cards 3 weeks ago. It was on a shelf in a secondhand store near my apartment. The cardboard box holding the cards looked old and torn. It had no markings on the front. The man selling it said he picked it up from a storage unit sale years ago. He said it was old, from some gambler nobody knew much about. I liked old cards. I liked the feel of them. I liked their weight. They were quieter than new decks. They made a soft sound when I shuffled them. I bought the deck. I took it home. I put it on my kitchen table. That night, I stayed up late drinking tap water, waiting for something to do. I started shuffling those old cards. That was the first time I noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror above my sink did not match the way I held the cards. I thought I was tired, so I ignored it. I live alone in a small apartment with one living room, one bedroom, a bathroom, and a small kitchen. The bathroom mirror is the largest one I own. I can carry it around if I want. I keep it sometimes on a hook behind the bathroom door. I also have a smaller rectangular mirror in the kitchen, about the size of a magazine cover, nailed to the wall above the sink. I use it to check my face. Sometimes I watch myself as I wash dishes. That first night I was in the kitchen with the deck of cards, and the light overhead was dull, just one bulb. I stood there facing the mirror, shuffling the deck. I saw my own hands in the reflection, but I also saw a slight difference. In my real hands, I had a random set of cards. In the reflection, I noticed something off. The top card looked different. My actual top card might have been a Queen of Clubs, but the reflection showed a Jack of Hearts. At least, that's what I thought I saw. I remember blinking a few times. After a minute, the reflection matched again. I told myself I was just too tired. The next night around midnight, I did the same thing. I stood in front of the mirror with the old deck. I shuffled slowly. I looked straight at the reflection. My hands felt a bit sweaty. My apartment was quiet except for my refrigerator humming. I shuffled and then spread the cards in my hands. In the reflection, I saw an extra hand. It wasn't just my two hands. There was a third hand there, hovering next to mine, passing me cards that I wasn't actually holding. I turned around. There was nothing behind me. I looked back at the mirror. I only saw it for a second, then it was gone. I put the cards down. I took a deep breath. I ran some water from the tap and rinsed my face. I felt my heart beating hard. I didn't say anything. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there and stared at my face in the mirror. My eyes looked red. I stayed up until dawn, but I didn't touch the cards again that night. The following nights, I tried again, feeling nervous and angry with myself. I turned on a small lamp in the living room, hoping more light would help. I stood in front of the mirror and shuffled the deck slowly. The cards felt dry. I could hear them riffle. I watched the reflection. My reflection was there, doing the same movements. I did a few shuffles and looked closer. Suddenly in the mirror there was a hand that didn't belong to me. It looked pale and thin. It moved slower than my hands. As I held the deck, the reflection showed that hand placing a single card face up on an imaginary table. I looked down. I didn't have any card face up on my side. I only saw it in the mirror. The card in the reflection was the Ace of Spades. On my side, the top card in my hand was actually a 10 of diamonds. I looked at my own cards. They were normal. I looked back at the mirror. The pale hand was gone. The reflection just showed my face sweaty and my hands holding the deck. My mouth felt dry. I pulled open a drawer and took out a dish towel. I wiped my forehead. I listened to the quiet apartment. I didn't hear anything else. This started happening every night. I tried at midnight. I tried at 1 in the morning. It only happened past midnight. The old deck seemed normal at any other time. During the day, if I shuffled in front of any mirror, nothing strange happened. But after midnight, if I stood there and shuffled, I would see that hand again. It always appeared in the reflection, placing down cards or holding them up, never matching what was in my actual hands. I tried looking directly at my hands while the reflection showed something else. I could see the difference easily. If the reflection's hand placed down a king of clubs, my real top card might be a 3 of diamonds. I had no idea how this was happening. I tried a few experiments. One night around 12:30, I brought the bathroom mirror into the living room. I propped it up on a chair and turned off all other lights, except for a floor lamp. I stood in front of that mirror and shuffled the deck. I watched closely. The strange hand appeared again. It was a left hand with long fingers and skin that looked almost gray. It came from the edge of the reflection, as if someone was standing just outside my field of view, passing cards into the frame. The cards that appeared were never the same ones I held. One night, the reflection's hand showed me a 5 of hearts, then a king of diamonds, then a queen of spades. On my side, I had completely different cards. I tried flipping my own cards face up on my kitchen table. The reflection didn't care. It still showed something else. When I tried to look away and back, the hand sometimes vanished. Other times it lingered for a few seconds. I also tried to reach out and touch the mirror. I placed my palm against the glass, which felt cold and smooth. I saw my reflection's hand do the same. But then behind my reflected hand, that strange pale hand slipped a card under it, as if hiding it from me. I couldn't feel anything, of course. There was just the glass. I breathed through my mouth, and my heart rate picked up every time I did this. My hand sometimes shook. I tried keeping a glass of water nearby. I sipped water and watched. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't understand, but I kept doing it because I needed to know if it was real. I have spent hours doing this now. Every night I see something new. I always see that hand. One night, I tried speaking. I said, "Who's there?" I said it quietly. My voice sounded thin in the stillness of the room. I heard nothing back. The reflection just showed me what looked like someone dealing a series of cards. They seemed to form a pattern. I saw a sequence of clubs and hearts laid out in the reflection as if on a table, but on my side, I was just standing there holding the deck. I spread my cards. They did not match. The reflection showed a pattern I couldn't follow. I couldn't read any message in it. I tried asking more questions. I got no reply. I just heard my own breathing and the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I got frustrated. I tried to ignore it for a few nights. I left the cards in a drawer. I didn't pick them up after midnight. I sat in my armchair, drank water, and went to bed early. Nothing happened. My apartment stayed quiet, but after a few days, I felt drawn back to that mirror. I felt like I needed to see if it would happen again. Around midnight, I took out the deck and shuffled in front of the bathroom mirror. Right away, I saw that pale hand. It placed down 3 cards in a row. I looked carefully at them. In the reflection, I saw a jack of clubs, a 7 of spades, and a 10 of hearts. On my side, I actually drew those exact cards from somewhere in the deck and held them face up on my table just to see what would happen. The reflections pattern shifted. Now the reflections hand showed different cards. It was never the same on both sides. When I tried to match what I saw with what I held, it changed. I could never catch up. Sometimes I felt sweat running down my back. My apartment got hot at night, even if I left a window open. Sometimes I heard my neighbor's TV through the wall. I would stand there for hours trying to understand what I was seeing. I felt my legs get numb from standing. I heard the cards riffle in my hands. I smelled the old cardboard and the slight moldy scent of the old deck. The reflection never produced a sound. It just showed a slow, deliberate movement of that pale hand, as if it had all the time in the world. I tried shining a flashlight on the mirror, but nothing changed. I tried adjusting the light in the room, but the hand always showed up after midnight if I tried shuffling. If I put the deck away, nothing happened. If I took a different deck of cards, a newer one, nothing strange happened. It only worked with that old deck. One night I examined the deck card by card. There were 52 cards, all worn in an old-fashioned way. The backs were a faded red pattern. The faces were the standard French suits. Nothing was unusual. Aces through kings. There were no jokers. The corners were yellowed. The deck smelled old. I saw no symbols, no words, no marks that would suggest anything special. Yet the mirror showed me something impossible. I started feeling restless. During the day, I would think about it. At night, I would wait for midnight and try again. I became nervous about my own sanity. I tried recording it with my phone's camera. I set up the phone on a shelf behind me to film the reflection while I shuffled. The next morning, I checked the video. It showed nothing strange. It showed me standing there, shuffling cards, nothing else. No pale hand. No strange cards. Just me. The mirror in the video looked normal. I cursed under my breath when I saw that. I tried again the next night, from a different angle. The same thing happened. The camera never caught the extra hand or the mismatched cards. Only my eyes saw it. That made me feel uneasy. I rubbed my eyes when it happened, but it didn't go away. I tried wearing sunglasses. The reflection still changed. I tried turning away from the mirror and just peeking in my peripheral vision. I still saw it. I couldn't escape it. Over time, the reflected cards became more specific. One night, the pale hand dealt a line of 4 cards. A 4 of diamonds, a 2 of clubs, a 9 of hearts, and a king of spades. I stared at them in the reflection. I looked at my own deck. I tried pulling those exact 4 cards in that order out of my deck and placing them on my kitchen table. When I did that, the reflection's hand changed the order, as if mocking my attempt to mirror it. My stomach tightened. I tapped my foot on the floor. I felt sweat in my palms. I said, "Stop that." Nothing changed. The reflection continued to show that pale hand dealing out different sequences of cards. Another night, I thought I recognized a pattern. The reflections cards seemed to highlight suits that reminded me of something I did years ago. I used to cheat at poker games. I once lied to a friend about a winning hand. I remember I had a king of diamonds hidden in my sleeve. Now I saw the reflection's hand holding that exact card, pressing it against the glass as if showing it to me. I breathed hard and stepped back. I didn't want to think about that. I didn't want to remember anything. But the reflection kept showing me old cards I once used in private games. I couldn't prove it, but I felt it. I felt my heart race. I tried leaving the apartment at midnight before shuffling just to avoid this. I went down the stairs to the street and walked around for an hour. When I came back and looked in the mirror at the cards, nothing happened. But the next night, as soon as I tried again, the pale hand returned. It was always there as long as I performed my little midnight ritual. I stopped sleeping well. I woke up sweating. I dreamed about that pale hand passing cards behind my back. During the day, I stared at the deck and thought about throwing it away. One evening, I took the deck and shoved it into a box in the closet. At midnight, I took out a new deck and shuffled it in front of the mirror. Nothing strange happened. I felt relieved. The next night, I tried again with the new deck. Nothing happened. I smiled and thought it was over. But then I found the old deck on my kitchen counter the following morning. I know I left it in the closet. Yet it was there on the counter as if I had forgotten it. I frowned, picked it up, and checked the closet. The box was still there, but empty. I felt a chill run down my arms. I shoved the old deck into a kitchen drawer and locked it. That night, I looked in the mirror and stood there doing nothing. Just stood there. Nothing happened. I got curious. At around 1 in the morning, I opened the drawer, took out the old deck, and shuffled it in front of the mirror. The pale hand appeared again. It placed a card against the glass. It was a king of diamonds again. I placed my own king of diamonds on the table. The reflection changed to a jack of clubs. I couldn't follow its logic. I just stood there with my heart pounding and my throat dry. I wiped my hands on my pants. I put the deck down and walked away. This pattern continued for days. I would try different approaches. Sometimes I would put the deck in a metal tin. Sometimes I would wrap it in a towel. No matter what I did, if I tried shuffling the deck after midnight in front of a mirror, that pale hand would appear and show me cards I wasn't holding. Sometimes the hand would hold a single card for a long time as if waiting for me to do something. I'd try to match it, but never could. It always changed. Other times the hand would deal a sequence, then pull them back again. My shoulders tightened. My headache worsened. I tried drinking more water and washing my face before starting. Nothing helped. I never saw a face in the reflection, just that pale hand. No voice or words appeared, only cards. But the cards made me remember things. They left me feeling uneasy. I knew I was losing track of time at night. I'd stand there for hours, my legs hurting from standing, my neck stiff, my eyes burning from staring at the reflection. I wanted it to stop, but I couldn't help checking. I needed to see if something would change. One night I tried breaking the mirror. I took a small hammer and tapped the edge of the glass lightly, not wanting to startle my neighbors. It didn't break, so I tried harder and the mirror cracked with a snapping sound. There was a small crack in the corner. I smiled, thinking this would stop it. But when I held the deck up and shuffled again, the reflection still showed that pale hand through the crack, as if the crack weren't there. The hand still placed strange cards, and the reflection of the crack didn't hide anything. I saw everything just as before. My stomach churned. I put down the hammer, backed away, and sat on the floor. I looked at the mirror from a few feet away. I saw my reflection holding the deck. I saw that pale hand. I felt trapped. I closed my eyes for a moment, opened them again, and the hand was still there. After that, I stopped trying to fight it. I locked the deck in a trunk, but found myself standing in front of a mirror again at midnight with it. Sometimes I didn't even remember taking it out. I just ended up there, shuffling, watching that pale hand show me impossible cards. My mouth tasted bitter. My eyes stung. I could feel my heart beating fast. The sound of the card shuffling filled my ears. The reflection never changed back to normal as long as I stood there and kept shuffling. I could only stop by putting the deck away and leaving the room. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't explain what I see, or show anyone. The phone's camera never catches it. It's always there though, as long as I stand in front of a mirror after midnight and shuffle that old deck. Every time I do it, I feel my body tense up, breathe hard, my hands shake, I sweat. I smell my own sweat in old cardboard. I see that pale hand dealing cards I can't hold, can't match, and can't ignore. I keep trying to find a reason for it, but have nothing. It's just me, the deck, and that reflection. Tonight, I'm not gonna fight it. I'm just gonna stand here and watch the reflection closely, shuffle slowly, and see what it does. Watch that hand move the cards around. I'm going to feel the sweat on my palms and taste the dryness in my mouth. I'm going to look at my own eyes in the mirror, red and tired. I'm gonna wait until dawn. When dawn comes, maybe I'll put the deck away again. But for now, I'm here, and that pale hand is there showing me cards I cannot hold. It was my first night in the rented cabin when I realized something wasn't right. I'd driven up that winding road, past a few scattered houses, and then no houses at all, until I reached a simple wooden structure at the end of an overgrown trail. I had just signed the divorce papers a month before, and I wanted a place to clear my head. The online listing showed a peaceful cottage near some hiking paths. The owner didn't mention anything unusual. I unpacked my bag, checked the kitchen cabinets, and made a quick sandwich. The place was small, a living room with old armchairs and a low table, a kitchen separated by a short counter, a narrow hallway leading to a bedroom, and a tiny bathroom. It smelled dusty and stale, but that didn't bother me. That first night I sat in the armchair with a cup of cheap coffee, listening to the quiet. Wind passed through the eaves. There were no neighbors. The only nearby signs of life were a few birds that rustled outside before sunset. I closed the main door, locked it, and turned off the small lamp beside me. The darkness felt complete. I had a flashlight, but I didn't want to use it unless I had to. I went to the bedroom, got under the thick blankets, and tried to sleep. I think it was around midnight when I heard the first creak. It came from somewhere near the living room. I opened my eyes. The cabin had old wooden floors, and I assumed they settled at night. I listened a bit longer and heard another creak, a clear sound like weight shifting on a loose plank. I turned on the small lamp beside the bed. I got up, walked to the door of my room, and opened it. The hallway was empty. The living room was dark, quiet, and still. I flicked the overhead light switch. Nothing unusual. The furniture stood where I left it. I checked the front door. Still locked. Windows were closed. I went back to bed a little uneasy. The next day I woke up feeling stiff and tired. I made instant coffee and ate some crackers. Morning light came through the dusty windows. I decided to look around more carefully. The living room floor had a thin layer of dust near the corners. In one corner behind the armchair, I saw something that looked like the outline of a shoe print. I leaned in. It was a single partial print. The front half of a shoe. I hadn't stepped there. I tried to match my own shoe with it. It didn't match. My shoes had a different tread pattern. I thought maybe it was from someone who had stayed here before, but it looked fresh. The dust was disturbed only in that spot. I checked the doors and windows again. Everything was normal. I didn't see any animal tracks outside. I took a walk around the property. There was an empty storage shed behind the cabin with old lawn chairs and rotted boards. No footprints were there. I climbed a small slope behind the property. The trees were tall and thick, with no other cabins visible. I returned inside. The day passed slowly. I read an old newspaper I found in the small bookshelf. I took a shower in the cramped bathroom, ate a can of tuna for lunch. I tried to relax but kept thinking about the sound I heard. That night I turned off the lights again around 10. I lay in bed fully dressed except for my shoes, with a flashlight in my hand. I forced myself to keep my eyes closed and just listen. The cabin groaned with the wind outside, but that was different. Around midnight I heard the same sound. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the living room. I sat up. I heard a soft thump, like a footstep. The sound moved slowly toward the hallway. I held my breath. It felt like someone was out there walking so quietly that only an occasional creak gave it away. I turned on my flashlight, got out of bed, and stepped into the hallway. The air felt heavy, as if someone stood right in front of me, but there was nobody. I looked left and right. Nothing. The living room furniture looked normal. I walked slowly across each plank, testing the floor with my weight. Some boards creaked, others didn't. I saw no new footprints, but I noticed a faint disturbance in the dust on the low table in the living room. It looked like someone had pressed down on it. There was a slight smudge like a shape of a hand or an elbow, but I couldn't tell. It just looked like something had rested there. The dust wasn't uniform. I went back to bed, my heart pounding. The rest of the night was quiet. In the morning, I drank more coffee and decided to clean the floor to track any new prints. I swept and wiped the dust as best I could. The cabin didn't have a vacuum or modern cleaning tools, so I used an old broom and a damp rag. I made sure the hallway and living room floor were clear of dust. If footprints showed up again, I would notice. I spent the afternoon sitting at the table, going over my phone's signal strength. There was none. And checking my car, everything seemed normal outside. I thought maybe I was losing it, or maybe the noise was just old wood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. That evening, I cooked a packet of dry pasta and heated some canned tomato sauce. I ate in silence, listening for anything. As the sun set, I locked both doors again. I walked around, pressing on the windows to make sure they were secure. Then I waited. I sat in the armchair with my flashlight and a kitchen knife on the table beside me. The only light was a dim bulb in the kitchen area. Around midnight, I turned off that bulb and waited in the dark. I wasn't sleepy, I felt tense. At some point, I heard a faint scrape near the front door. I shone my flashlight on the door. Nothing moved. Then I heard a soft creak on the floor near the table. I stood up, stepped forward, holding my flashlight out before me. The beam of light showed empty air, empty chairs, and a dusty rug. But I felt something, like a presence right at the edge of the light, as if it knew I couldn't see it. I moved the flashlight slowly. Nothing. I looked down at the floor. The dust I had cleaned was gone, but I could see one fresh footprint, a full footprint this time near the armchair. It was clear that someone had stepped there. The size looked close to my shoe size. Maybe a little smaller. The shape was different from mine, with a flatter sole. I tried to follow the direction of the footprint, but it was just that one print. I checked the table where I had put the knife. The knife was still there, but I noticed a slight shift in the position of my phone on the table. It looked like it had been nudged. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I grabbed the knife and walked around the cabin in the dark, shining my flashlight on every corner. I opened the bathroom door. Empty. I pulled open the bedroom closet. Empty. I checked under the bed. Just old boxes. No one. But I kept feeling watched. I could feel my heart beating hard. I sat down on the bed, knife in hand, and waited. Nothing else happened that night. In the morning, I felt exhausted. My back ached. I had barely slept. I stepped outside, breathing the cold air. I listened for voices or distant sounds. There was only wind in the trees. I decided to inspect every inch of the cabin. I looked for hidden doors or panels. Checked the attic hatch and the hallway ceiling. The attic was empty. Just a small space with insulation and a bare light bulb. No footprints there, no animals, no droppings. Just dusty boards. I put the ladder back and closed the hatch. By afternoon, I realized I had no good explanation. Something invisible walked into my cabin at night. It touched my furniture and left footprints. I considered leaving, but I had paid for a week, and I felt stubborn. I didn't want to be driven out by something I couldn't see. I had no idea what it was. My plan was to confront it somehow. I set a few small traps, a few empty cans in the hallway so they would rattle if stepped on. I sprinkled flour on the floor near the bedroom door to catch prints, and placed a chair against the front door to see if it would move. I kept my flashlight and kitchen knife ready. When darkness fell, I felt tense again. I turned off all the lights and got into bed. I left my bedroom door half open. The hallway was barely visible. I lay there, staring at the slice of darkness. Around midnight, I heard the cans in the hallway rattle. Something had touched them. I shot up with flashlight in hand and aimed it at the floor. The cans rolled slightly, but I saw nothing. I got up and stepped forward. I shone my light on the flour I had sprinkled. There were footprints, 2 clear footprints leading toward my bedroom door. The footprints were deeper than before, as if something heavier stood there. I couldn't see anything in the beam of light, just empty air filled those footprints. I heard a soft breath, very close, like a faint exhale. My stomach tightened. I took a step back. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "Who's there?" I waited. No response. I reached forward slowly with my free hand. The air felt strange, like pushing into a spot that was thicker. But I touched nothing solid, just air. The footprints did not move. I pulled my hand back and backed into the bedroom, closing the door and locking it. I stood behind the door, listening. I heard 2 slow steps outside, the floor creaking softly. Then silence. I didn't sleep that night. I just stood there, sometimes sitting on the bed, waiting to see if the door handle would turn. It never did, but I could sense something on the other side. I thought about leaving right then, but it was night, and I didn't want to run to my car in the dark without knowing what was out there. I waited until dawn. When the first light came through the window, I threw my clothes into my bag, grabbed my keys, and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty, but the footprints in the flour remained. I went to the front door. The chair I had placed was slightly moved, a few inches to the left. The door was still locked from the inside. I decided to stay another night. Part of me wanted to see if it would get even closer. Maybe reveal itself. I felt sick thinking about it, but I had come here to clear my mind and refused to leave terrified. I cleaned up the flowers in cans, then replaced them with a different setup. I piled some loose boards from the storage shed in the living room near the hallway entrance. If something walked through there, it would have to step on them. I also left a small radio turned on at low volume in the living room. I wanted to hear if the volume changed. I locked the windows again. That evening, I ate dry cereal and sipped water. I had no appetite. I waited in bed with lights off, door half open again. The radio played static and faint music. Around midnight, I noticed the volume dropping. I listened carefully. The music got quieter as if someone was turning the knob. Then it went silent. I got up, flashlight off, and stood at the bedroom door. I couldn't see anything, but I heard wood creak as if a foot pressed down on the boards I had placed. I clicked on my flashlight. The radio was now off. The boards in the living room had shifted. The footprints were back, this time leading straight down the hallway. They stopped a few feet from my bedroom door. I aimed the light at the empty space. Nothing there. Just footprints hovering on the floor in a line ending abruptly. I noticed my breathing was heavy. My palms were sweaty. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like a change in air pressure. I stepped forward. The footprints did not change. I felt a sudden chill on my face, as if someone stood too close. I backed away again and closed the door. I sat on the bed, holding the flashlight. For the next hour, I listened. The floor creaked once more, right outside my door. Then silence. The door never moved. I did not sleep that night either. In the morning, I saw that the footprints had vanished again, and the dust looked disturbed all over the hallway, as if someone had walked around aimlessly. I couldn't handle staying any longer. I packed my bag, made sure I left nothing behind, and walked to the front door. My hands shook as I turned the lock. I opened it wide, expecting something to block my way, but nothing did. I stepped outside. The air felt normal. I went to my car and started it up. The engine sounded steady. I didn't look back at the cabin. I drove down the trail, following the same route I had come. The trees looked the same. The sky was clear. I never found out what was inside that place. I never told anyone about the footprints and the sounds. I left the key in the mailbox at the foot of the trail and never returned.